Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Safety, Sustainability and Human Resources panel. Before we start the agenda, just to let everybody know that the TfL is now benefiting from the temporary changes to the local authority meetings that are included in the Coronavirus Act 2020. And that means the meeting is being held using Teams as usual, but it's also being webcast to TfL's YouTube channel so that public and press can observe. Is that okay with everybody? Thank you. Also, secondly, to underline that safety is paramount at TfL. And as usual, I invite members present at the meeting to raise any safety issues either under matters arising or under a specific agenda item. And obviously in this particular meeting there's plenty of scope to do that because it's heavily focused on safety. Issues can also be raised with Howard Carter or another member of the Executive Committee after the meeting, and they can relate to any safety or security matter that you might have noticed if you've been travelling on the network over the past period. So now we can move to apologies for absence. Howard, have we got any apologies for absence?
Chair, no, I'm not aware of any apologies for absence from members. And on the staff side, Gareth Powell sends his apologies and is unable to attend, but Jonathan Fox, I believe, is on the call to take anything that Gareth would have dealt with.
Okay, thank you. So can we just do the declarations of interest next, Howard, please?
Yes, Chair, I can confirm that the declarations of interest of members are up to date, as far as I'm aware, on the TfL website, and I'm not aware of anything that's a specific issue in relation to this meeting, but obviously members are free to declare that if there is anything that ought to be declared.
Anything anybody would like to declare?
Just Councillor Julian Bell here, just my usual declaration in terms of being leader of Ealing Council and a member of London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, and obviously the street space funding that we've received is why I'm making that declaration, but I think I shall make general comments.
Okay, we'll be aware of that when we get to that item. Thanks, Julian.
And Chair, we won't be taking any decisions specifically about that in this meeting, so I don't think that gives a direct conflict in terms of the interest, but obviously members will bear in mind the declaration that's been made. Okay,
thank you both. Can we now look at the minutes of the last meeting, which was a joint meeting with the Customer Services and Operational Performance panel, and that was back in June. You've seen the minutes. Are there any comments on accuracy, first of all? No, therefore can we approve the minutes of that joint meeting, and they will be signed at a future date when that's practical?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So moving to the matters arising and actions list, Howard.
Chair, thank you. I wasn't intending to say anything more than is in the paper, but if anybody would like to ask any questions or raise any points, obviously we'd be happy to take those.
Are there any points? I think some of the issues will come up later in the agenda, even when they're further for reporting further forward in the year. Okay, in that case, can we now move on to the substantive agenda? And the first item is the quarterly Safety, Health and Environment Performance Report. And I think, Lily, you're going to introduce that.
Yes, thanks, Kay.
Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Kay, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes, I wanted to just give a brief overview of the quarterly report, which is for our first quarter of the year. Now that's the period April through to June. And of course, that completely coincides with the period which was our lockdown within the London area due to the coronavirus pandemic. And that obviously had a very profound effect in terms of suppressing the number of journeys that were made, particularly by public transport, but also by road. And we can obviously see that reflected in the incident trends that we're seeing. And it's also meant that we've revised the way that we track progress in terms of our scorecards by looking at incidents in relation to journeys. So we're still getting a real picture as to risk and who is being injured. I think just to pull out some highlights from the report, it does show a general overall reduction in incidents. There are, however, of course, some incidents which do stand out, and alongside the very tragic deaths that we saw to TfL employees and those who work for TfL due to coronavirus during this time, we also saw 2 customer fatalities on our network. One which a gentleman on the Bakerloo line at Waterloo fell back onto the track and was subsequently killed, and another where a 9-year-old boy was able to access the tracks at North Acton and was also died. So in addition to that, there were 19 road fatalities. The other thing I would mention about this meeting and when it takes place in terms of fatalities is around this time last year, on the 18th of September, we remember that Christian Tuvey, our workforce colleague, was killed at Waterloo Station when undertaking maintenance work. So the anniversary of that on the 18th is also coming up, and there will be a small memorial, just small, involving his family at that time. So just turning to some of the trends in the paper, we're now tracking progress in the first half of the year, what we call H1, against a new scorecard. And that, as I mentioned, is what we call rate-based. So it's looking at the number of incidents, people being either killed or seriously injured per million journey stages, as well as the number of our customers or workforce injured by the million passenger journeys. And on both of those metrics, we can see that we have actually done better than the target on our scorecard. That's obviously a good outcome, but I should note that obviously it's the first time that this target and scorecard's been used. So there will be a period of adjustment to make sure we are tracking performance in the right way. Looking at customer and workforce injuries more generally across the quarter, there was a very substantial drop, an 80% drop in customer injuries and a 64% drop in workforce injuries. Obviously, this relates to the very significant drop in passenger journeys. And when we actually normalize these trends across journeys, we can actually see that risk did actually increase a bit, mainly just with minor injuries around the bus network and TfL Rail, but it's obviously something we need to absolutely keep an eye on. Similarly, on the roads, there was a positive picture insofar as there was a 47% reduction in the number of people being killed or seriously injured on the road network compared to the same period last year. Notwithstanding, there were still 19 people killed. And of those, there was a very large proportion of them were motorcyclists. So just over half were motorcyclists. Where we saw the biggest reduction in people being seriously injured or killed on the road network was in pedestrians. There was 72% less such injuries in this quarter compared to last quarter. And that obviously reflects the fact there's just been a huge reduction in people moving about on foot on the network during this period. And as we now enter the autumn period with children returning to school and people in some places going back into the office, that pedestrian movement will restart. So we need to keep an absolute eye on it. And the areas that we're watching are speeding. There's been a lot of focus on speed enforcement over the summer with ongoing enforcement activities by the Metropolitan Police. But there's also been a lot of action by TfL with the Street Stays programme to put in place safe measures to make the road network safer for people on bike and foot. And we'll hear more from Sam Monk on that. Just turning to a couple of the other aspects of the report, in terms of workplace violence, again, with the depressed nature of the usage of the network, there was a general reduction in workplace violence. Where there's been workplace violence, related to, say, to COVID activities, by which I mean asking people to put on face coverings or any kind of pushback on those, or people being spat at, we will absolutely enforce it in the strongest terms and seek strong penalties for anybody who has tried to aggress our workforce in that way. In terms of health, the report outlines a number of people off work during this COVID period, and that's captured in the pages, and it also actually includes a number of people on furlough. Both of, throughout the period, there was an enormous focus on supporting the well-being of staff, and we ran a well-being tracker throughout June and July to understand how people were feeling and where we could better support them in terms of their well-being, and we obviously have a paper on that later on later on the agenda. And then the final theme of the report is obviously around our environmental performance. And we've continued to make very positive progress in reducing nitrous oxides from buses. So there was 63% less nitrous oxides produced from buses in the years 1920 compared to the year before. And that really illustrates the very positive impact of introducing the Central London ultra-low emission zone, which is transforming and cleaning up the bus fleet right across the capital, and has also led to a 38% reduction in PM10s. That's also bringing CO2 benefits as we transition our buses over to more electric vehicles, with a 10% reduction in the amount of CO2 from buses. And overall, operationally, there was an 8% reduction in CO2 across the last year. And that largely reflects the changes to the bus fleet, but also the greening of the electricity in the general grid from which we currently purchase our electricity. But obviously, we have a very advanced program now for transferring our electricity consumption to renewable sources. And the final elements highlighted in the report are the ongoing engagement with regulators. This has been very active throughout the period of the pandemic. We are meeting the ORR weekly to talk through with how we're managing risk. And there is obviously some incidents in particular that they're focusing on. One is the SPAD that happened at Cheltenham and on the children trains. And the other obviously is the ongoing investigation into the fatality at Waterloo. We'll continue to support, obviously, our regulators in all of these conversations. So hopefully that's a useful overview. Happy to delve into any of the detail in the report or share questions across with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily, and thanks to the team for getting this comprehensive report together in the circumstances that we've had over the last while. Just before I bring the members in, just to say that obviously we deeply regret any deaths that have occurred on our network and on our roads, and as always our thoughts are with the bereaved families. I can see Mark and Bronwyn wanting to come in, and then I'll bring in others, Nina and any others that might want to indicate. So Mark, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. Lily, could you just perhaps give us an overview about the data caveat on page 7, I think it is, of the She Quarterly report? That the basis of my question is that last year we also had some data issues, and I suppose it would be helpful just to get some assurance about how we're managing data quality in our reporting across the piece on this. Thank you.
Just before you come back on that, Lily, and actually you're on mute, I wanted to ask about that as well, and perhaps this, while you're reporting, while you're responding, I could also link this to a question about the data on buses, because part of the data caveat, which I hope you'll be able to unpack, as Mark has said, suggests that some of the problem has arisen with data about buses. I'm not sure where that data is coming from before it gets to us, so that was one specific question. And the other question is, do we not normally have much more specific information about buses? And do we not normally have information about particularly bus collision injuries? And is there a reason why we haven't got that this time. And also, I don't know whether you can explain from what we already know, why would there have been an increase in injuries on buses, either minor or serious, at a point where many fewer people are travelling on buses?
Okay, let me just
that all relates.
Sorry, that's quite a few. There was one I think I missed, but I'll come back to that. So just more generally, this issue, and this is in the report in the interest of openness. This is not a very significant issue. The issues we reported to you last year in terms of changing, there have been obviously a number of changes to the way data is collected in TfL. If you think about the fact that safety incidents can arise from every single aspect of our work, from the moment a person walks into the office through to all of our operations, through to the use of the customers. So there will always be some little bit that may be changing. So there was obviously an ongoing dialogue around the changing in reporting from the police on road network collisions. That led to some changes over the last 2 years in how we report that. There were some changes in how we collected our own customer and workforce data last year, which was one of the narratives that we were then playing back in the report about that target. This is slightly different. This is data on injuries that happen on the bus network. It's provided, Kay, by the bus operators themselves. They are charged with filling out the data and providing it to us. We, just through due diligence, are constantly going back and looking through data records and looking for anything that isn't consistent or where there might be errors. And on this one, we've just found that we feel that some data wasn't fully reported. And therefore, we need to just validate it. It's not going to be a major correction. We just wanted to share it with you and to use the opportunity to re-engage with bus operators and just make sure that they are really effectively filling in those so that we get the best quality information we can. In terms of the detail of the report, I think it would be worth probably having a separate meeting with UK to go through and to review the report, because there has been, obviously in line with having less staff available over the summer, some streamlining of the report in terms of everything that's in there. Now, if there is other information that you feel should be in there, then we can potentially, we can put it back in. But I think there's tried to be a balance of focusing on top line indicators here. But you're right, it would probably be helpful to have more information on bus injuries specifically in there. So we can certainly take that away as an action for future. And I'd be interested to get yours or the rest of the panel's thoughts on it. In terms of an increase in minor injuries, it's obviously not, that's not in absolute terms. It's in a rate per journey. That's what's actually shown. If I assume that perhaps you're looking at the figure 1 in the report, which is on page 7. And that is because, I mean, the issue is it's probably quite hard to detect because the numbers were relatively low, but the overall absolute numbers are down, but even within that, there was a slight increase. And obviously, we'd need to look at that over a slightly longer period of time to understand if there's any particular trends in there. But I would say that they were mainly slips and trips and low level incidents. Did I get your point as well, Mark? I think I did. So I tried to explain. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I understand the rate point, Lily. It's just that the paragraph about the data specifically references injuries on buses, and it would just be useful to know exactly what that looks like over a period when there have been curtailed bus journeys. But I mean, the point is made, and thanks for your response. Bronwyn.
Can't hear you, Bronwyn.
You're on mute, Bronwyn. Still on mute.
Sorry, done it now. I wanted to ask a question around what's happening with the cleaning service on London Underground, which I I asked, it's harking back to a question I asked at the board meeting, and it is a particular worry that I have in terms of the fact that there is a contract efficiency innovation clause in the contract with the London Underground cleaners, which is incentivising cost cutting. And since 2017, there's been a cut in the number of cleaners of 6.3%, or 139 full-time equivalent workers. And now that we're in this period of the coronavirus, which places much higher demand on the service, I think that surely must adversely affect the service. And I think we need to look at the experience of the National Health Service in terms of outsourcing cleaning, which over a number of years, which a lot of research has been done around, it shows that there was a deterioration in cleaning standards and an increase in hospital-acquired infections like MRSA. And the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish health services have now rejected outsourcing of cleaning services. They just don't do it anymore. And for me, it stands to reason that a low-paid workforce on minimum conditions that feels very strongly that it's suffering discrimination in the workplace, which the RMT has done surveys which show that, stands to reason that they'll perform far worse than one which is directly employed on good terms and conditions. And the pay and conditions of the London Underground cleaners is the bare legal minimum, except that they get the London living wage as required by TfL. And prior to the coronavirus, they were on statutory sick pay. And I'm wondering whether this has changed, because it would have an impact on their decision to come into work if, in fact, they themselves were feeling unwell. And I think in this absolutely unprecedented period, which looks as if it's going to be keeping on going for the foreseeable future, which is a period of a public health emergency, that we owe it to our workforce and to the travelling public to look at bringing the cleaning service back in-house. And I really think that we should be looking at the practicalities of doing that, and that we should be, involving the relevant union in looking at the practicalities of doing that. So that I want to put that to the committee, and also as a question to managers. Why is it that we are not looking to do this, to bring the service back in-house?
Well, I'm going to bring in Andy, because obviously he is MD of LU. Just with regards to the management of safety and health on the London Underground network, obviously the cleaners have done an absolutely brilliant job. And for all of us, and all of you who might have been down the tube of late, you'll have seen that it sparkles and glimmers. It's really, really clean. And we are doing a lot of, we have work planned underway to do sampling of the network. And the sampling we've done so far has shown that it is COVID-free, which is absolutely as we expect and want it to be. So our focus is absolutely on keeping the cleanest, safest network that we can. And I'm very proud of the work we've done on that with the cleaners that we have. But Andy, do you want to just pick up maybe briefly some of the points that Bronwyn makes?
Yeah, thanks, Lily. Bronwyn, thanks for the comments. I mean, firstly, just to echo Lily's comments, I mean, I can't heap enough praise on what ABM and their staff have done. Since before lockdown, actually, ABM approached us. Well, actually, it was a joint piece of work around how could we take actions to improve the cleanliness of the tube based on what we thought might happen. And as a result, the tube was the first transport network in the UK to use the new cleaning materials and adopt a higher frequency cleaning regime using the hospital grade disinfectants. So I think we should actually recognise at the panel that the work we did was industry leading and has subsequently been adopted across the wider rail and bus industry. And the comments regarding the workforce and their terms and conditions, we work with ABM to help them increase statutory or their sick pay allowance for their workforce. And actually, we also have increased our funds so that they have laid on additional resource, and they've taken on more work across the TfL estate to support our requirements during the pandemic. And those resources are still there, and we're still working with ABM. And I think we have to recognise ABM are experts in the cleaning profession. I'm certainly not. I think they've done an amazing job. What we also have to bear in mind is that, you know, in the current financial circumstances we're in, we have to ensure we deliver the best possible value for London, whilst ensuring that safety is the absolute first priority. And that's why some of the work that Lily and her team have done to sample the tube network and the bus network has, I think, vindicated the actions that we've taken and the work that ABM have done. So, yeah, my priority is to make sure we keep the tube as clean as possible, do whatever we can to encourage our customers and passengers back onto the network and give them the assurance that they need. We'll continue to work extremely closely with ABM, and throughout this we worked extremely closely with our trade union colleagues from all the unions on what are the right things we need to put in place to keep the services running, keep our colleagues safe, and keep our passengers safe, and that will be the focus going forward. And I say ultimately we have to ensure we deliver the best possible value for London in terms of the service that we provide and the measures that we use to do that.
Bronwyn, your hand is still up.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to come back on that, which was to say that Andy's explained and talked about, you know, the good service that ABM has provided. But the question I'm asking is, can we look at the comparison between that service as provided by a private company, outsourced company, and how that service would perform if carried out directly by TfL and with directly employing the workers? And I'm asking, could we look at, together with the union, what that means and what it would involve? It's an investigation that we can do. We can look at a comparison of the two. And I think if we're, you know, as I know we are in TfL, our priority is the health and safety of our workers and the travelling public. We prioritise that, we put it forward, and so we're totally committed to that. And I think to investigate whether it would be better to bring the service in-house would be a way of carrying forward that fundamental principle. We may investigate and find out, no, it's not going to be any good, but we may investigate and find out, yes, it will be better. So that is the proposal I'm putting forward, is that is what we do.
So if I may, I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation offline, Bronwyn, around what is the right thing to do in terms of service provisions and who provides those services. I'm not sure that a conversation of this nature is necessarily appropriate for this committee, because I don't think it's necessarily a safety issue. You know, my priority for this committee is around making sure we deliver the cleanest, safest service for our customers and our staff. And yeah, happy to have a discussion offline around what wider conversations and discussions we should have in terms of future value for money and the financial situation that TfL finds itself in. But if I may, Chair, perhaps I can take an action to have a discussion offline with Bronwyn on this matter.
Okay, Bronwyn, would you like to take up that offer from Andy? And also just to note that the question that is outside the remit of this particular panel about the employment status of the cleaning staff, I know is one that is an active discussion between the unions and the Deputy Mayor for Transport. So can we just leave that at the moment and say that you and Andy will talk about the other specific proposal about the practicalities of doing that investigation that you've asked for? Is that okay? Yep.
Yes.
Yes, Mei-Ling, I can see you waiting, but waving, I mean. But we've got Nina next, then Mark, then you, Mei-Ling.
Oh, thank you, Kay. My question goes back to something more about the data and hearing about the reportable injuries and the significant incidents that we've seen happened. The two about signal issues and also around the wall collapse around that. And so fortunately, you know, these are significant near misses, and it's understanding the underlying as to why those are happening. And it says the ORR and RAIB were notified and an investigation is underway. There's nothing in here to say what will we do when we hear the results of that investigation, and how will we in the board be informed. The reason I pick up on this, because wall collapsing went through a spate of a reason for many infrastructure projects failing, and there are lots of studies around, you know, the behaviours around walls and things like that. So I think it's really important that we don't just clock it in this health and safety report and then we don't look at lessons learned from that and making sure that we investigate what else is going on, what other circumstances underlying that. May have no relevance, but I don't want to lose that. So if Lily can let me know how we will be kept informed and what she will do about it. My last area, of course, as you can imagine, is around energy and the environment. On the graphics which show, let me say what page it is to help everybody, page 27 of your report, Lily, is 10% good enough in terms of CO2 reduction to get us to meet our target? It just is left dangling there. It's showing a trend going down, but I'm kind of wanting to understand where the goal is with respect to that. So anything to show where the ambition is or where we want to be is a much more useful graphic, because otherwise we could just sit here going, oh, that's good. So if you can help us with understanding where you think we should be. And then the last point is around the energy procurement. Yes, this is a fantastic steps that are being made. I'm really pleased to hear it. And I'm pleased to hear about this plan to launch beginning of October-ish, because that's the start of Q2, isn't it? So it's not far away. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about what's going to be going out there in terms of warming up the market to support TfL's initiatives. So anything I can do personally to help, that would be great. You know, I'll be happy to do so. But let's hear, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that means.
Great, thanks, Nina. What I'm going to do is answer those in reverse order, because I want to bring Andy in about the particular incidents at the end. So just to pick up the CO2 point, 10% probably isn't enough, and you're right that I'm happy to take it away, and I think there's an action coming from what you've said and Kay said, to look at how we're representing data in the report, and is it very clear in terms of showing our overall trends and where we need to get to. We know that 10% was largely delivered both by actions that we've taken from purchasing more electric buses, but also by action that others have taken, such as the overall greening of the grid. So it's good news, but it isn't all good news down to us. So we need to be open and honest about that, and we also need to show the speed at which our trajectory is aiming at. With that transitions to the work on energy procurement, because that is planned to get us to the target of a 2030 zero carbon railway. So that is our aim, and that is what we're planning to do through that programme. And there is more detail going to the Finance Committee later this month, which will show how that programme maps out to do so. The procurement itself, pending the conversations at the Finance Committee, would go live in the first part of 2021. And the plan would be that we'd start then taking on board renewable electricity from early 2022, and that would keep us on track for that trajectory that we're aiming for. We have done some very exciting market engagement over the summer with providers who've been more ambitious, super keen to work with us, and perhaps I think all of our expectations were met on that, and it also gave us confidence that there are some really substantial new developments that we could potentially be looking to invest in that would be financially attractive to us, and actually significantly there aren't existing assets, so they would overall net for the UK help reduce CO2 emissions. So that would be a real win. I'll bring more detail to the Finance Committee, Nina, and I'm happy to have a separate discussion with you on that. Just on the incidents. Incidents don't just happen, so we do need to learn from them. So for both the incidents you mentioned, the wall collapse and the Chiltern Railway SPAD, there are formal investigations going on alongside the RAIB or RRR, whichever is relevant in each case, investigations. We have our own internal meetings where we review these. We also have an ExCo meeting quarterly to deep dive into these kind of things. So they aren't just done and put on the shelf. But I'll bring in Andy, because obviously you're very close to these incidents, Andy.
Thanks, Lily. And
Andy, just sorry to interrupt you, but just while you're coming in on this, could you also touch on the DLR incident that we had a brief report about, the coroner's report, because I found it quite alarming that it was to do with a hazard on the track, an obstacle on the track, and I found it quite alarming to understand. Sorry, Lily?
I was just going to say John Fox who's on and got his hand up, might be better to speak on the DLR incident because it's directly under his control.
Okay. Well, I mean, the only point I was making was it was alarming to realise that there wasn't any mechanical or technological measure already in place to prevent those sorts of collisions. Seemed rather antiquated to have to rely on somebody spotting it from a platform. Anyway, Jonathan can come back on that. Sorry, Andy, to interrupt.
No problem, Kate. I'm conscious I've not sort of given any updates, so shall I just cover both those incidents and a couple of other points at the same time, and then I'll ask John to come in on the DLR specific incident, if that's okay. Nina, thank you for raising the concerns about the two incidents. The wall collapse at East Ham was a very significant event. It was about 115 metres of wall, 115, and the wall we believe to be over 100 years old. It's the boundary between the track and a number of rear gardens of private residential properties. The wall carried all the support infrastructure for the railway, so air systems, electrical systems, power systems, signalling systems, and also new infrastructure for the four-line modernisation re-signalling as well. So it was a very substantial wall and a very significant failure. We immediately initiated a formal investigation report and let the relevant authorities know. The RAIB have decided that they are not going to formally investigate the matter. They're leaving it to us to do, but keep them informed. We have taken a number of immediate actions, as you would imagine, post the event. We've done full inspections of all similar walls across the entire LU network. We actually had another wall a week later that had issues. It didn't collapse in the same way, but it did have significant issues and had dropped a small distance vertically, but hadn't come onto the railway. So that's led to us to already undertake those inspections and also review the process for which we install new infrastructure on other infrastructure across the network, bearing in mind we have clearly an awful lot of Victorian engineering construction across the tube. So a number of immediate actions already taken, and we'll absolutely keep the committee and the panel informed of the outcome of the investigation and any further actions coming from that. On the Chiltern Railway SPAD, this in my view is probably one of the most serious near misses that we've seen in many years. The infrastructure in that area, it's London Underground track, it's London Underground signalling, and it's shared railway between ourselves and Chiltern Railways. There is a full investigation being conducted by the RAIB and the ORR. I've had a number of direct conversations with the Managing Director of Chiltern Railways. We've got a very good open investigation involving all parties. I have to say, some weeks on now, we knew this actually within a matter of hours, that there doesn't appear to have been any failing at all on the part of LU, either in terms of infrastructure or signalling, or the driver of there was a Metropolitan line train that was in the platform ready to move north. In fact, the train operator of the LU tube train deserves great credit, because he was the one who actually notified the signaller of the event. So it was a very serious event. There's a lot of human factors involved, we believe, on the Chiltern side, and clearly there'll be a number of technical and procedural actions, I think, that will come out of this, because there are differences between the Chiltern Railway trains and their procedures, and also the London Underground trains and our procedures. So we'll absolutely keep the panel informed. We've also, it's worth noting that I've instigated a review, which has been led by George Clark, my Director of Technical Authority, working with Network Rail and all the train operating. We don't have any timeline yet as to when their investigation will conclude, but again, we'll keep the panel updated on that. And myself and both Vernon Everett will be representing TfL at the memorial next week. And then lastly, if I may, just to whilst it's an absolutely tragic event, the 9-year-old boy who sadly passed actually wasn't a customer. He was a local resident who gained access to the railway and tragically was killed. We've had some other medical condition which was a factor in the event as well. But so it's being treated as a trespass incident accordingly. But we did provide support to his family through BTP as well, because of the dreadful circumstances surrounding the incident. So I hope that answers Nina's questions and just gives an update on a couple of other points, and I'll hand over to John for the DLR incident.
Thanks, Andy. If I can take that incident, a couple of things I think to say. One is, being a driverless railway, we have been challenged down the years by both the regulatory and advisory bodies to look at technology which would enable obstacle detection, so-called systems. Down the years, unfortunately, the technology has not been sufficiently capable, and we get false positives happening quite regularly across systems when birds or debris or mobile phones fall onto the system and create a complete stop to the railway. And we consider the balance of risk of having regular stoppages with trains full and standing against the risk of or the benefit of obstacle detection systems in stations. And on balance, we made the point that probably is worth continuing as we are, but with the mitigations that we have to have in place of vigilance and so on. So we've taken a mitigation approach to that. It reads, however, slightly strangely, doesn't it, as you say, Kay? So it's one of those things that we will have another look at the technology. It hasn't really worked as well as we would like it to down the years, but perhaps more modern technology where you're looking at profiling of obstacles and so on, having a different regime which is more controlled is something worth looking at again. But it is expensive, and it is something we'd have to look at in terms of that cost-benefit balance.
Yeah, I can see it's expensive, but a coroner's report certainly raises alarm bells and suggests that there's value for money in saving lives. Anyway, I won't dwell on the point. Your hand is still up, Nina. Did you want to come back before others come in?
Yes, thank you, Kay. I just wanted to thank Andy for that clearer explanation, of which you only see in the report as 2 short paragraphs. And I'm really heartened to hear that the depth of the examination that you're going to be doing and the lessons learned. I know that phrase sounds very hackneyed, lessons learned, but we really have to, because notwithstanding the terrible deaths and the incidents we've seen, we can avoid an awful lot if we really do implement those lessons. So thank you for that. Okay, I've got Mark, Mei Ling and Julian. No, Mark shaking
his head. So Mei Ling, you first, then Julian.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 issues. First one is about instilling confidence to our travelling public to return to use the public network. And one of them Lily touched on is about regular sampling of our network, particularly the underground, and to test the level of cleanliness. And I think the results need to be publicized better, because one, I want to ask is, how regular is this sampling happening? And 2, if we really get really positive results, like, we know that it looks super clean, but if we get these results, I think they should be more widely publicized. Because the 3 issues about confidence in the use of our public transport network is about cleanliness, it's about mask wearing, and it's about the fear of lack of social distancing while you're still in the carriages or in the bus. So I think on the issue of cleanliness, I think the results of our sampling by UCL or any other should be really promoted much more widely. So that's one issue. The other issue is about KSI data on the roads. We've now seen an increase in return to car use, particularly in the outer London area. And I think I would like to see in future data presentation some level of granularity in terms of the differences between inner and outer London. Obviously, with inner London, there's much more wide use of cycling. One, we've increased the capacity and level of access. But I think it would be useful to look at the KSI figures broken down, not right down to the individual borough level. That might be of interest to local leaders and to our staff who are working with the boroughs. But I think some level of difference, and because we know that if there are differences with increased car use as well, beyond zone 3, I think we know that they require different approaches from how we deal with whether it's speed or increased car use, particularly private car use in outer and inner borough, in the outer and inner boroughs. The third issue is the increased use of electric scooters. I know this is an ongoing issue. I have seen it even in my local area, the recklessness of their usage. We know that at the moment it's illegal to use privately owned electric scooters, but nevertheless it still happens. And it's not just the speed, but I think until we have laws and the powers to actually govern this use much better and much more widely, I think it's really important to put the message out about how they should be used properly. And I have seen people either jumping from pavement to cycle lanes and crossing roads at speed and weaving in and out of cyclists as well. And I think this is a real issue. It's very difficult to enforce in real time. Obviously, you've got to be there, and it's very hard to catch them even on cameras. So I think that is still, it will be an increasing problem. So that's the 3 issues I want to raise.
Thanks, Mei Ling. So I'll just jump in and pick some of those up. My colleagues may want to come in on some of them. Just in terms of installing confidence in network, it is absolutely clear. And the issues you raise, cleanliness, confidence that people are going to be wearing masks, social distancing, comes through loud and clear in our talking to customers and knowing actually what worries them. So on the cleanliness point of view, we have had, so there has been ad hoc sampling to date. So the UCL was doing sampling for another study, and then we got results from that. And there's been another couple of surveys, all very helpful in ensuring that we've got information. But the formal programme kicks off in the next week or so, and then we will then get monthly results. And the intention is obviously to learn from them and to share them. It isn't a hugely extensive sampling program, simply because you can't be everywhere at all times. It's to do sampling to get is to try to mirror the customer journey in a number of locations, basically, and to learn from that. But I couldn't hand on heart say we have, we've swabbed every single surface of the network, and we can, say it's to basically be a touch survey and to just check where we are on that. It is absolutely critical that we keep pressure on the other elements, though. The mask wearing is super important because it is obviously about reducing airborne transmission as well. So all of the activity we're doing around enforcement, about communicating that message to customers, making it the social norm, is just as important as is the social distancing. But we will be making use of that sampling, and we will be making sure that we can help build confidence through that understanding. On the outer London car use, that is really, it's a really, really good question that you ask. We do actually have that data at a much more granular level, as you would suggest. And this allows us to understand where across the road network risk is higher. And we are actually using that information to feed directly into the designs of some of our street space programme. But I might just bring in my colleague Stuart Reid, who is my head of insights and direction, who's on this call, because he can just give you a little bit more detail on that and also pick up the scooters point.
Thank you, Lily. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, as Lily says, we have the data broken down by location, and when we publish our full sort of validated data set for 2019, which will be in about 3 weeks' time, we will be showing it broken down both by central, inner and outer London and by borough as well. That's the current intention. For the data which we feed into the quarterly reports, that is provisional data and remains provisional because, as we've discussed in previous iterations of this meeting, there is a sort of validation lag until we have absolute confidence in the data. But certainly at the level you've suggested, which is breaking it down by central, inner and outer, I think we can provide that in future reports going forward, just to sort of show you the differential. It is something that we're going to in a little bit more detail in the next paper on the agenda, looking at trends during COVID. But I think to a sort of first approximation, over the last 3 months, over the quarter in question, I think we've seen a much greater reduction in people being killed and seriously injured in inner London than in central London, than in inner and outer, and actually probably the riskiest area seems to be the sort of boundary around Zone 1, that sort of that kind of that ring around Zone 1, where we have quite complex environments, quite a lot of activity, quite constrained street layouts. So there is definitely some geographic variation that we are keeping track of, and obviously feeding that information both into our street space programme, but also to our colleagues in the Metropolitan Police. Did you want to just touch on e-scooters? Yes. Yes, sorry. That's also something that we are now actively tracking. I think there are limits to our ability to track exactly what's going on, both in terms of levels of activity, because it's an illegal mode at the moment, and also the primary data source we have is those incidents recorded by the police. So we're likely to be underestimating incidents where people fall off and injure themselves and present as sort of accident and emergency departments, but that's not necessarily coming through in the data. But we are, nevertheless, through the police data, we're tracking now on a weekly basis what the emerging picture is amongst scooter users. And I think it's quite early days. I think we have seen an uptick in the number of injuries that we're recording, particularly from around the end of June, which may be linked to a number of things, including the sort of easing of lockdown, good weather, but also perhaps some of the ambiguity that might be in people's minds, as some forms of scooter use are seeming to become legal through hiring schemes, others not, and that may be resulting in more usage, which is then feeding through into the data. So it's something we're keeping a close eye on, and obviously working closely with colleagues who are developing the potential London trial to ensure that the messaging is clear around what scooter use is legal and what remains illegal.
Okay, you're on mute. Still on mute.
It's doing it by itself, I should add. And I can see you, Nina, you were waving.
Yeah, I'm just...
But was it on scooters? Because I've got Julia waiting. Okay.
No, just quickly on scooters. Well, I've seen, because I've been using public transport to come, because I'm in my office here in the REA in London on the bus, and as recent as yesterday, there was a guy with a scooter actually on the bus, and you putting the scooter in the the area reserved for disabled, and also for ultimately for prams area. So it was, I nearly started a conversation, but we were all socially distanced with masks on at that time. So you see this hybridization happening, and some clarity there. And also I had a near miss with a scooter crossing over to get to the bus, because they literally just jump off the footpath onto the road and then back onto the footpath again. So it is the start, I'm afraid. Thank you.
They can be a menace. Julian.
Yeah, thanks. Mine was just a quick comment on the discussion we were having before about the coroner's report and the DLR incident, and how you would actually be made to use technology to recognise somebody on the track, and it was just to wonder if there's a way to adapt something that we developed at Ealing Council, our cycle safety shield, which was using anti-missile technology, and which overcame false positives around street furniture setting off lorry cycle safety systems, and only gave you a positive when it was actually a pedestrian or a cyclist. So it was just to wonder whether that was a possibility.
Thanks. I don't know, John, did you want to comment on that?
We're in the middle of looking at the technology again, so more than happy to have a conversation, Julian, offline about that, to understand what you learnt locally. Yes, so fine.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. So your hand's still up, Julian. Do you want to come back? No. Well, that's... Lillian, please don't. Lily, don't laugh at me. That seems to be all the comments. We spent a long time on that, but I think that Lily and the rest of the team, you should take that as indicative of the high level of importance that safety holds in within TfL. So can we move on to Vision Zero and COVID-19? I think this is you again, Lily.
Thank you, and thank you, panel. Thanks also for all your really useful comments on that report, and we will take them away and reflect how we can continue to improve the report. I'd actually like to ask Stuart to introduce this paper and to lead on answering questions, if that's okay. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thanks, Lily. So Lily has picked out some of the headlines already, which were also incorporated in the quarterly report, but to summarise, we have seen, as might have been expected, the number of deaths and serious injuries on London's roads and streets reduce substantially over the period of the COVID lockdown, and you'd expect that because the level of activity of all varieties declined substantially. In the quarter, we saw a 47% reduction in deaths and serious injuries compared to the same period in 2019. We've seen a similar significant reduction in the number of deaths on London streets, so that year to date, and this is sort of up to the minute, this isn't the quarterly figure, year to date from the 1st of January, we have seen 60 people have lost their lives on London streets compared to 81 over the same period last year. However, and I think Lily touched on this, the primary benefit has been amongst pedestrians. The number of cyclists killed over the period has been the same as last year, and the number of motorcyclists has actually increased somewhat. So as has previously been set out, we are starting to track this in terms of risk now, and to look at the scorecard in terms of risk. There are some challenges there because it's quite difficult to get reliable up to the minute information on levels of activity by pedestrians and cyclists, and obviously, as we were saying a moment ago, the modes like e-scooters. But we've been tracking risk since the beginning of the lockdown period, and what we have found is that the amount of activity has declined more rapidly than the number of people killed and seriously injured. So risk actually has risen over the lockdown period. It peaked around the end of May and subsequently has declined somewhat and is getting back towards pre-COVID levels, but is not yet there. We're now, that was looking at the sort of baseline of the week or so prior to the lockdown. We're now going through an exercise of comparing to 2019 as well, because obviously there you would expect some seasonal variability. So there's further analysis to do. But we've definitely seen an increase in risk. Partly we attribute this to increased speeding over the period. We saw significant increases in average speeds on all classes of roads in London during the lockdown period as reduced congestion made higher speeds possible. We also saw increased instances of extreme speeding, and we worked closely with the Metropolitan Police, particularly their colleagues in the CPOS team, to ensure that the Metropolitan Police were being fed that information on a very, very regular basis and were able to use it to inform their tasking plans. Going down to the next level of detail, that sort of aggregate picture shows some significant variability in the way risks and casualties have evolved during the COVID period. Firstly, we have seen a change in the severity ratio. In other words, although there have been fewer injuries recorded overall, when injuries are recorded, they're more likely to be severe or fatal. So the reduction in slight injuries has been greater than in the reduction in the other sort of levels of injury severity. Again, this may be partly linked to the vehicle speeds that I mentioned a moment ago. Secondly, the changes in travel patterns have fed through into a changed profile in injuries, whereby there's been the most significant reduction in injuries proportionately has been during the morning peak. And as that morning peak has flattened out, as the commuter peak has flattened out, we've seen that feed through into the injury figures. We also have seen differential by mode, where the greatest increases in risk have been experienced by people cycling and walking. That potentially linked to speed, as I said, also potentially linked to a loss of the safety in numbers effect. And that's something we're going to be investigating in a bit more detail to see if we can understand that relationship in a bit more detail. And then finally, as we were discussing a moment ago, there has been geographic variation, where with central London experiencing the greatest proportionate reduction in deaths and serious injuries, and that sort of zone 2, zone 3 boundary being the geography of greatest concern. there are a number of things that we're doing about this, many of which you will be aware of, but just to cover the broad bases. Firstly, we've reviewed our Vision Zero action plan, and the strategic framework remains applicable. Many of the activities in that which had been suspended due to COVID are now resuming. Things that were not possible under COVID restrictions, such as one-to-one training of motorcyclists, for example, have now resumed and are being promoted. Training of cyclists is resuming, but has also been converted into digital and online forms by colleagues in CCT and so on. Secondly, the street space programme, of which you will be very well aware, is a direct response to the need to support higher levels of active travel and reduce risk in the post-COVID recovery period. We continue to work closely with the Metropolitan Police and ensure that their focus is on the locations and behaviours of greatest risk. We're doing some further work now to develop a more broadly based culture campaign. We're going to be relaunching in the autumn the marketing work that the CCT teams have used previously around speed compliance, but we're also starting to look at some more broadly based work around the culture of road use and the not just individual behaviours such as speeding or mobile phone use, but the sort of underlying values and understanding that people have around safe road use. And in respect particularly of powered two-wheelers, we are now doing some work supported by some independent researchers to analyse in quite some detail the forensic reports that the police have produced following fatal incidents, to really try and get to the root causes and understand what else we can be doing to respond, and what other sort of points of intervention there may be for us to respond to the very high level of risk which powered two-wheeler users both experience within London and also to an extent which they represent to other road users, particularly pedestrians. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour through the paper. I'll assume it's been read. Those are just the highlights, and I'm very happy to take questions.
And it was a very useful paper. Thank you, Stuart. Is that somebody? I can't see any hands up. Was somebody shouting? No, nobody is waving. The only question I wanted to ask Stuart was about the changing profile of risk as we go further into the autumn and winter, with the weather changing and more people going back to work, we assume, so there'll be more people out and about. I mean, presumably you're doing those sorts of projections on the basis of a projected change in the risk profile. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, it is. We're certainly that's work that we're doing. Obviously, the precise nature of the kind of levels of activity we're going to see is if we knew that accurately, we would we would be able to feed that information to all sorts of decision making. But no, absolutely, we're projecting forward. We believe, based on where we are currently in terms of fatalities, for example, that by the year end we will be somewhere in the region. We will have somewhere in the region of 95 deaths recorded. Insofar as it's possible, we're looking at what those projections mean, both in terms of things like the timing of communication campaigns, but also looking at how, in a slightly more sort of mid-range, we look at what the kind of, that you'll be aware perhaps of the different future scenarios for London that have been developed, looking at how the post-COVID world could unfold, and we're using those as a basis for understanding what the casualty consequences could be of different modal mixes, but also not just in a sort of passive, well, what might happen way, but then using that to inform refocusing of our activities to make sure that we respond and preempt those things.
Okay, thank you. And you'll be coming back to us at future meetings with updates, no doubt.
I think I'll be here at every meeting, yes.
Good. Well, you've been very welcome. We look forward to seeing you. Can we now move on to street space? And is that you, Alex?
Yeah, it is. Okay, it's a double act actually today on this, because I'm going to go through a bit of background to the report, and I'm going to focus on the Word document that's in front of you. There's also a PowerPoint which covers similar issues, but I'll cover the background and then hand over to a colleague, Sam Monk, who will talk through the progress across London and the monitoring framework as well. And I suppose the first point I was going to make really is this is actually a really interesting programme. A lot is being delivered across London streets. As a Londoner myself, going around the city, you'll see quite a lot of these schemes popping up. Some of them working, some of them not. But there's a lot of quite significant change being delivered in short order. And it's just worth noting that the programme, the London Street Space programme, did not exist 6 months ago. And at the onset of the pandemic, it was quite clear that the programme of investment we were planning to deliver with the boroughs, or the LIP programme, was frankly not relevant to the emergency that we were facing then. So as part of the H1 negotiations with government, we secured £55 million for this programme, and it's delivering a whole series of interventions on London streets, wider pavements for pedestrians to help social distancing, more strategic cycle networks, low traffic neighbourhoods, which can be a difficult issue in some neighbourhoods, school streets across London. I see the smile from Julian because I know that some of the ones that he's dealing with are there. But a lot of activity being delivered in short order, and Sam will go through that in a bit more detail in a bit. The one thing I would emphasise though is why are we doing it? And in Para 3.7, we kind of summarise this issue about the risk of a car-led recovery. And if you look at some of the data that I went through this at the board in July, really some of the key data, the effect of the pandemic is people are travelling a lot less. That's very clear that there's a lot less movement out there. But if you look at the disaggregation of that in terms of mode, vehicle trips have gone from a low around 30% up to 93% of norm now. So they're back up to very similar to levels to what they were before. On the tube, the height of the pandemic, it was around 5% of norm. Yesterday's data, it was around 34% of norm. So it's a steady incline, but well below what it was pre-pandemic. Buses, I think it was around 20% of norm at the height of the pandemic, but we're now at around 58%. Probably boosted slightly with the return to schools this week and more zip cards being used. But you can see that there is that concern and underuse of public transport matched with more people using or people continuing to use their cars. So in that context, it's really important that we invest to support people to walk and cycle around the city for those short trips that they would otherwise use for a car, or for some of the longer trips for cycling as well in particular, but also with schools return. A really important issue is to kind of get people to walk and cycle to school, but they need the infrastructure to support them to do that really. So that's a kind of quick kind of canter through the kind of background to the programme and why we're doing it and why it's so important. And I'll hand over now to my colleague Sam Monk, who will pick up on some of what's actually been delivered. Okay, Sam.
Thanks, Alex. So I think the first thing I'd say is that I don't think we've ever seen anything on this scope or at this speed ever on the surface investment in London, and it has involved a huge amount of credit really to all 33 boroughs who are involved for their ability to turn on a sixpence, to freeze the sort of business as usual investment programme, the planned investment that was going to happen this year, and then to deliver against these public health imperatives. So I think that has involved a huge amount of work from them, We are funding projects in every single borough on borough roads, as well as on our own roads too, using the DFT funding that came to us specifically for this purpose. We are, as part of that, also providing some sunk cost funding to boroughs, including maintaining their officer capacity for the future. So both for now and for the future. Without that, I think we would have lost a great deal of delivery capacity across London. So some of what we're delivering now at speed has been conversion of existing plans, but bringing them forward, accelerating them using temporary materials. But the fast pace and the very tight deadlines on this, remembering that our funding for this runs out in mid-October, has meant that we've had to work incredibly closely with boroughs. So we've been very proactive in terms of exchanging information on a weekly basis about what can be delivered, what can't be delivered, what has become delayed. So we've already shifted about £4 million between projects and even between boroughs, and that continues week by week. So the numbers of projects that we're delivering also changes week by week. So at the moment, I think even on what you can see here, the numbers of projects that are completed have risen quite sharply. So it's now 267 projects completed as of last week. And I fully expect that when we compile the information for this Friday, it will go up by another 90 to 100 schemes. So the progress is enormous. It's also worth remembering that we are working against the changing context. So the changing PHE guidance, our ability to provide that safer public transport for more people, the return of traffic, that has definitely been an issue that we've had to learn to manage, and our ability to be able to deal with that, and just to try and understand what we think demand will be and how that might change in different situations. So it's not been without controversy. We do have 2 applications for judicial review, one of a particular scheme and one against the programme as a whole from 2 taxi trade bodies. So that's being considered at the moment. It's also had some significant impacts on some areas. So we are working incredibly closely with the emergency services, for example, all 3 and us, and with the boroughs, to try and make sure that they're not overwhelmed by the scale of change. So we've worked with all of the boroughs and the emergency services to improve the flow of information between all bodies and to make sure that the engagement is happening as early as possible. Everybody is working constructively together. I think all of the emergency services have acknowledged that they can see the necessity to try and avoid a car-borne recovery, because congestion, if we get more congestion on our streets, nothing can get them through. So we've been working on that. We've been picking up some issues around accessibility, and we will be continuing to engage with accessibility groups as well as active travel groups to see how we can improve our flexibility and responsiveness. So listening to, encouraging feedback and listening to and responding to that. So just as one example, we've reviewed all of our 33 sites for social distancing on the TLRN. On 7 of those sites, we have switched from barriers to built-out pavements, so that there's no barrier for access there. On 6 sites, there has been either full or very significant removal of the project, where we've deemed that actually it's not been as positive as we thought it would be in terms of how it would be used, and so we've actually taken some of those measures out already. We've written to all 33 boroughs to explain what we've done and to encourage them to review their projects in a similar way. On other projects, we've added gaps in the barriers. So even where we think the barriers are still appropriate, we've added the gaps to make sure that the permeability is still there. So there has been a huge amount of delivery in a very short amount of time. That has come with some pressures, not least work pressures, I think, for the professionals across London. But I think the delivery has been very impressive indeed, and we're continuing to see that going forward. We will continue to see some pressures, particularly as the level of traffic rises. So how we manage to fit that back into a changed situation. But at the same time, our monitoring needs to be able to pick up on not just the project level impacts, but also the overall program level impacts. So have we in fact helped to increase the number of people who are coming back to cycling, switching to cycling and walking? Are we managing to impact on those sort of key issues which will enable us to address some of the issues around both the immediate public health epidemic, but also in the longer term, the wider issues around health and how we manage London. We know we've also picked up some noise. I'm sure you will also be aware of that. Some kickback on social media around some of the measures that have been in place, some specific projects, but also just in terms of some of the road closures that have been introduced around low traffic neighbourhoods. So we are working with the boroughs at the moment and with other stakeholders too, to try and make sure that we put together the best package of information that we can, not only for our own use and for stakeholders, but actually for elected members as well, to be able to set out the case for what we're doing. And with that monitoring, we are working closely with boroughs to say, well, if you're doing X on your roads and we're doing Y on our roads, how do those two things fit together? And what are the impacts of those two things together? Do we need to tweak the designs of what we're doing to be able to make sure that we are not having unforeseen or unwanted impacts? So all of that is happening at speed. I'm anticipating that we will be able to look back and pick up on quite a lot of that through our monitoring regime. The future from here is we have a 20 million bid in for DFT Tranche 2 money. We put together that bid with focusing on strategic cycling and low traffic neighbourhoods and made up of bids from boroughs. We do think that if we get the right settlement from DFT for the wider TfL investment picture, we may be able to return to a more mixed economy of street-based projects, the temporary projects, and more normal borough programmes. But that is entirely dependent on that settlement. And then we know that in the future, all of these temporary schemes have a maximum life of 18 months. During that time, they can flex and change. But at some point, decisions will need to be taken either by ourselves or by boroughs about whether these projects are worthy and of becoming permanent. That will need to go through due process, including engagement, assessment of the impacts, and consultation where necessary. And we'll need to learn from the monitoring to be able to make those decisions. And there will be funding implications from that too. And lastly, I think we just want to be able to make sure that we're also learning from the techniques that are being used and the materials, everything that we're doing on a cheap, fast, temporary basis. Is there something there, probably several lessons that we can learn to apply to the future programme, again, from ourselves and boroughs, about how we do things and the swiftness of our ability to act. So all of this is very much a work in progress. We are in the middle of it. Week by week, our numbers change. But yeah, I would just want to repeat the sort of praise for boroughs in their ability to be able to rise to the challenge on this. And yeah, that's probably as much as you need to hear from me.
Okay, thanks both. I can see Mark's. Mark,
thank you.
Mark.
I'd just like to understand on the Sam, on the 18-month time frame you referred to there, does that imply that the business cases for these schemes is being predicated on that basis?
I think we understand. I mean, some of them had pre-existing business cases because they were projects that we knew that we wanted to do and that the boroughs wanted to do. So particularly where we have aligned projects to the strategic cycling analysis. So we know there is value in those projects. They already have pre-existing business cases. Whether those eventually become those permanent schemes that we had anticipated, we don't know yet. So legally speaking, all of these projects have either experimental traffic orders or temporary traffic orders, which means they can only have an 18-month life. But we will need to make those decisions towards the end of that period, if we haven't already amended or taken them out, to be able to say, is this project valuable? Is it something we want to keep? And base the business case on our understanding of what the impacts have been. So I think that will be work in progress, and will only be finalised when those decisions are coming to be taken.
And Mei-Ling.
Yes, thank you. I think a very impressive.
Apologies,
very impressive programme, and thanks for all the hard work, and particularly with our borough colleagues as well. Just a couple of points. I was in a local meeting last week with the local councillors. I hasten to add, not wearing my TfL hat, but nevertheless, TfL was brought up. So I thought I'll share that with the officers. I think one of the frustration that some of the local councillors have expressed is about getting hold of the right people in TfL for further information or clarification of some of their local schemes. I think the frustration arose because of the fact that some officers, having started or got involved in the project, then went on furlough, and I think that was a frustration that the councillors expressing. They could not get hold of the right people to continue to raise issues that they picked up with their local residents. So I think obviously the onus is very much on the borough officers to also engage fully and regularly with the local councillors as well. But I think anything we can do to help, to make sure that that information, that communication, and that link, continuous link, and conversation with local councillors is really important to make sure that these local schemes are successful, and one, they do not, suffer, if you like, hiccups. I think the point about in 18 months' time, I think it's very important to make sure that, the decisions we make, whether these schemes become permanent, should be actually evidence-based. And I totally agree that we should be learning how to collect the right sort of evidence in terms of impact. And it's very important to have a baseline of before and after picture, of some of the, if you like, outcomes that we want these schemes to generate. So I can't overemphasize how important it is to make evidence-based decision making in terms of the future of these schemes. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Julian, before Sam and Alex come back.
Thank you very much, Kay. Sam, you picked up on some of the issues around the emergency services and access to low traffic neighbourhoods, and concerns of residents around that access of emergency services. As boroughs, we've been consulting with our emergency services, and I know that's been going on at London wide level as well. And one of the issues I think is and this is kind of evolving as we go forward, and we're proactively talking to the emergency services to make sure that we haven't missed anything in terms of what they're wanting to reassure residents about safe access. So I've written to the Chief Executive of the London Ambulance Service to say, is there anything more that we need to do as the local authority to ensure safety of our residents, because that's paramount. You talked about, and I think we're seeing this as boroughs, that these programs projects are evolving, and we initially with the LTNs started with a plan to put in complete barriers, but in response to the emergency services, we've put retractable bollards in and between planters, and that's been helpful. I think there's an issue about keys, which would be whether there is. So we're using standard fire brigade keys, but I'm not sure what the picture is across London, because the emergency services are saying there are different keys in different parts of London, and therefore that's a challenge for them. And I'd be interested to know about where we are in terms of using camera enforcement rather than full barriers and or retractable bollards. The second point is around just messaging and really emphasising to residents and car drivers, vehicle drivers especially, to in the immediate implementation of the LTNs to drive and behave in a safe way. You know, it becomes like the Wild West. People are driving over pavements to avoid the barriers, and it's really dangerous, particularly for children, but all pedestrians. So that's a message that needs to get out there. We've also had issues around vandalism of our barriers, with planters being tipped over, and bollards being damaged so that they can't be retracted. Now, the fire brigade tell me that they certainly can use the various bits of kit that they have on their trucks, get past any barrier, even if somebody's poured concrete into it to try and stop it being used, which is some of the things that we've had. But certainly we need to get that message out that people, if they vandalise bollards and barriers, again, it's got safety implications for access from our emergency services. Third point was around the second tranche, and whether or not there will be more time for pre-consultation before implementation. You know, that's one of the biggest pushbacks that we're having, and all boroughs are having, is people feeling as if this has been imposed on them and they're not being consulted, and not understanding the experimental traffic orders, which allow 6 months of consultation. But if there's some pre-consultation in the second round, that would be really helpful. And then finally, just a comment to say really positive about the online cycle training. I did it and found it really useful, and also a big positive about the 2 million funding for cycle training. And then one final plea, if and I know this is to government primarily, cycle parking with the uplift in cyclists is an issue, and my understanding is there's no funding for cycle parking in any of this COVID active travel funding that's coming through. So a plea for some lobbying for funding for cycle parking. Thank you.
Okay, shall I cover Mei Ling's, and Sam can cover Julian's ones? Is that okay?
Yeah, you've got a lot of questions to come back on. Could I, when you're coming back, could I just underline what others have asked about the longer term? And it was a specific question about the processes around deciding which of these schemes might be permanent, particularly with an eye on value for money. I mean, no doubt you are thinking about processes at the moment, and it would be helpful to know that. But I also ought to say that this whole project has been incredibly impressive in its speed and the progress that's been made, and also, as Julian was saying, the way that it's been able to be flexed as it's been evolving. So notwithstanding the problems that we can all see in our localities as we walk around, and we can see schemes being put in place and being removed because of problems with bus access in some cases, and displacement of traffic from closed off streets. Nevertheless, it's been hugely beneficial to date. So over to you for the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Kay. The first point that Mei-Ling raised about a local meeting and the concern about access to staff, I think that is a fair criticism, really. I think in hindsight, when we, at the height of the pandemic, we became aware of the furlough scheme and the teams of people working in this area, a lot of them were furloughed. And in hindsight, I think probably more were furloughed than probably we should have done initially. I think we didn't really, at that stage, didn't appreciate the scale of activity that was coming our way and the pace that this streetscapes program was being developed. So certainly in my team, the people were brought back as quickly as we can. I think that was the case in Sam's team as well, really. But I think certainly the boroughs have got a lot of contact with our teams at the moment in terms of tracking the schemes and then making sure that we help them on the community engagement when we can do. The point that you made, Mei-Ling, and others have made about this issue about the review process and what do we do in the 18 months. So I think that's a really interesting point and challenge, really. And I think that the way I'd look at it is that a lot of these schemes that have gone in short order, historically, we would have probably taken about 18 months to do the relevant process, through the business case, the consultation, the modelling, and the detailed design. And it would have taken, for a lot of these schemes, 18 months to 2 years to get them in. And we would have had all of that documentation to back up the schemes and probably maybe still would have amended them when they've gone in. These schemes are really being delivered at pace. You know, the one that I was always struck by is Park Lane Cycle Lane. That was conceived at the start of the week and implemented on a Monday and implemented on the Friday. You know, these are radical changes to our street space delivered in very quick pace and delivery. But what we are using, though, is we're using this 18-month window of time for the experimental traffic order to do all of the proper analysis of whether the scheme should be made permanent. And I think there are various components to that. One is capturing views, and my team are writing to kind of frontages and saying, you know, this scheme's got in, what do you think of it? Is it good? Is it working? Is it not so good? And it's quite interesting with you know, low traffic neighbourhoods, there's a lot of noise for a lot of them, and there is a concern about some of them, and some of them may well be taken out. But there's a lot of positives out there as well. There's a lot of people saying, you have changed my neighbourhood for the better. And you're delivering this cycle route, for example, 60 kilometres of segregated cycle lane in 6 months is unprecedented. So I think we need to be mindful of the pace, but also we will use this time to collect views, but also do some proper evaluation of impacts. And this is impacts of a scheme that's gone in. So I'll give you an example. In my neck of the woods up in Camden, there was a scheme that was put in to increase social distancing on Parkway. It led to significant impacts on the bus network and to increasing queues and probably worsening air quality as well, and it was taken out. So where we're not saying, oh, we'll put them in an 18 months time, we'll tell you what's going to happen. We're monitoring and tracking this in real time and collecting the evidence and information to make that judgment about which one should be made permanent. But also, if it is clear that it's not working, we're not going to waste our time and just say, we'll come back to you in 18 months' time. They are getting taken out if they're not working. But there's a lot of really good stuff that I think is going to stay. And I think one of the challenges we're going to have going forward is to turn them from a temporary scheme of, you know, plastic bollards and paint to permanent is a cost. And I think that's one of our discussions with the government is if we want to make these changes permanent, it can't just be, you know, plastic. It has to be, you know, granite and proper permanent materials, and that costs more really. So that is a key part of our negotiation with government really, is to say that permanent changes need, you know, a decent funding settlement as well really. So I think Julian raised a lot of detailed issues, which I'll kind of hand over to Sam if that's okay, because I think you're closer to a lot of that on the emergency services and the cameras and the cycle parking. Is that right?
Thanks. Yes. So yeah, on the emergency services, I agree. That's absolutely a key engagement, and we're meeting with them again on Friday. and at a higher level now, we're also engaging with the emergency services as well. So we're trying to make sure that we go in at a strategic as well as a tactical level. So we're constantly exchanging feedback. I met with the low tag group of borough officers last week as they were doing a sort of show and tell on low traffic neighbourhoods. And it was clear that boroughs had moved to using more ANPR enforced filters than was originally planned. And we are funding some of those ANPR cameras now, part funding. But I think that was an interesting evolution. It's not a perfect situation, as you will know, Julian. What happens when you get more PCNs issued, particularly if there's local confusion about change, then that itself can undermine public confidence in the project and belief in what the motivation for the project was. So there's not a clear and clean, this is the perfect silver bullet. It's a mix and match. But I think those conversations between the boroughs and the emergency services about what are the key routes which should be kept open and what are the ones where physical closures could be considered, I think that has improved radically in the last few months. But it's not an easy conversation. So that's continuing. On the messaging, I absolutely accept that we need to work on the messaging, and we're doing that now, including trying to gather some local opinion surveys about what public opinion really is, rather than what we see on social media. So we will be trying to put together that package of why are we doing this, what is the evidence around the benefits, and how are we doing it as well, that ability to flex and to be able to share that with all the boroughs. So that is a piece of work that we want to be able to do together. In terms of DfT Tranche 2, well, we haven't had it announced yet, so we don't know what we've got. We were expecting that a couple of weeks ago. I'm still hoping that we'll understand that in the next couple of weeks. What that should do is to give us money for boroughs, specifically for this LSP work through to the end of the financial year. So it does give us more time than we've had up until now. So the furious pace will still be there, but it might be slightly less furious. And I think that will give us all the ability to consider how much pre-engagement we can do. And I absolutely accept that actually people have grown to expect that pre-engagement, and just the fact that that didn't happen for all of those projects, that in itself was part of the kickback. It wasn't so much the content of what was being proposed, but just the fact that they hadn't had that chance to discuss it in advance. So I think that that will feed through to our collective thinking, I think, about how we might engage and take projects forward in the future. Did it work to do things at such pace? Well, not without cost, I think, reputational cost and just cost in terms of process. So we'll need to think about that. Cycle parking, it's absolutely in our ask for the second half of the year for the settlement from DfT. So it's in our revised budgets to do some more cycle parking with all of you. So I very much hope that we will get a settlement that will allow us to restart that. I mean, last financial year, collectively, you put in 3,500 cycle parking spaces. So we know that the demand is there. We just need to be able to bring that funding to bear, I think. And yeah, I'd absolutely echo Alex's point about the longer term decision making processes. We are working up how we would do that. We've not taken any decisions about any of our projects at the moment, but we're working up what the process might be for us and what we might take into consideration. And we intend to share that with the boroughs. Obviously, the boroughs are autonomous highway authorities, so how you will do it will be your decisions. But we're going to share how we will do it and to hopefully influence and to help how you might take those decisions too.
Julian, your hand is up again.
I just have a follow-up. It was on the cycle training. Obviously, as I said, the 2 million is welcome, but it's not enough, and so it was just to urge us to, in that negotiation with the second funding package, to look to see if we could get more cycle training funding.
I completely agree, Julian, and we meet with Andrew Gilligan from Number 10 every week, and we'll give him an update on the cycle training at the next meeting. Really, as you know, the online training has only just gone live, but I'm asking the team for an update on the numbers of people using it, which hopefully is an indication that we need more to kind of encourage more to take up that training offer. So, but I'll feedback when I've got some more data, Julian.
Okay, well, thank you both, Alex and Sam, very much. As has been emphasised, this is a fast developing scheme. Things are changing, and so I'm imagining that you'll be coming back to us regularly with updates as we progress through the scheme. Yeah?
Yep, happy to. Very happy to. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much. And now we're going to move on to Item 8, which is an update on the research on managing COVID risks in the bus operation. Is that you, Lily?
Hi, yes, so the next paper will be presented by my colleague, Dr. Samantha Phillips, who has been leading on this research that we have commissioned from the University College London. But obviously, throughout the research, we work very closely with colleagues in the bus network as well, particularly Claire Mann. But Sam, if you could just outline the key points of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this piece of research was undertaken with the Institute of Health Equity, who are under UCL, in order to look at the pattern of infection and deaths from COVID-19 in the bus worker population due to the sad loss of a number of bus worker colleagues who were predominantly drivers. And the first phase of the study has been completed and was made public on the 27th of July. So I'll just sort of highlight the main findings for you. So among the drivers who sadly died, most of them had stopped work within 10 days either side of lockdown. And this suggests that most of them became infected before lockdown. And the study therefore reinforces the point that lockdown was one of the most effective measures for reducing mortality. And they commented that they thought that had lockdown come earlier, then it's likely that fewer drivers would have died. Other findings were with regards to risk factors for poor outcomes with COVID. So amongst the drivers who died, they were predominantly older. Many of them had underlying medical conditions, and many of them were from Black and Asian minority ethnic backgrounds. And this is very much in keeping with the wider findings of the Office for National Statistics and PHE, who found similar risk factors. In fact, many of the drivers who died were identified as having hypertension. They also were found to live, the majority of them lived in London boroughs that were experiencing the highest death rates due to COVID. And they also tended to live in areas of above average deprivation. Another of the main findings was that the death rates did vary between bus companies, but there was no clear association found between the actions which those companies were taking, the type of actions, the speed in which they took them, and the death rates amongst their drivers. In fact, one of the companies that had the highest death rates had taken a lot of actions very quickly. The report therefore made a number of recommendations with regards to trying to ensure that we're aware of who is most at risk in case there is a second spike, and also with regards to trying to improve the general health and well-being of bus drivers in order to reduce their risk in this kind of situation. Following on from this, we have had a reference group which involved bereaved family members, trade unions and bus representatives in order to discuss this, and also to discuss the next phase, which will involve a questionnaire for bus workers. So at that reference group, they were able to comment on and make suggestions with regards to the questionnaire, and that questionnaire should be due to go out shortly. And the aim is for the second phase to report in December this year. So that's an overview, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. And we did discuss this at the board, at the last board meeting, because that was just shortly after the report was made public. But members will have some additional points to make now. Bronwyn?
Yes, my first question is around the fact that the major conclusion was that it was lockdown which had a very great influence on lowering the death rate in that sense, in that most of the deaths were 10 days, were around the 10 days before and the 10 days after lockdown. So I'm wondering how we are looking at this second spike, which appears to be developing very quickly at the moment, and around the fact that workers are being encouraged to go back to work, that we will have a higher level of passengers on the buses with them, wearing masks and social distancing and so on and so forth. But the fact that the easing of the lockdown, which is factors around this developing second spike. And the other question I wanted to ask, which is not directly to Sam, is whether the uniform risk assessment, which UCL has recommended, has it been implemented across all the bus operators? It did come up at the board, but at that point it wasn't clear whether it had been uniformly progressed throughout all of the 10 bus operators. And another question, not specifically about the research, but around remote sign-on for bus drivers, which is being pushed by Metroline, as I understand it, bus company. That means that drivers can start work and finish work at any point in a bus route. And how does that fit in with the recommendations in both the UCL study on the coronavirus deaths and also in the Loughborough research on fatigue? Because for instance, the fatigue management process requires personal interaction between somebody asking the driver, how do you feel, sort of thing, and that doesn't seem to be possible if a driver is signing on remotely, not at a bus depot, but anywhere elsewhere on the route. So those are my questions.
So Lily and Sam, before Mei Ling comes in, Bronwyn's questions.
Yeah. I can answer some of those. So with regards to the impact of lockdown and the potential future risk to workers if there is a second spike, I think although the study concluded that lockdown had the biggest effect, what it found was that it couldn't really comment on how impactful the measures that the bus companies took were, because they all happened around the same kind of time as lockdown, and lockdown clearly had that effect. And any measures that they took after lockdown, we can't really see how effective they were, but clearly things that were put in place, such as completely sealing off the screens, they use a separate UCL study into aerodynamics has shown that this is effective in reducing spread. So whilst there may be a second spike, there are now in place a number of measures to reduce risk, which we believe would be effective in doing so. The other question was with regards to the risk assessments. And I think, again, this is important in case there is a second spike. So at TfL, we've undertaken risk assessments of our vulnerable employees. And so now managers know who within their teams are vulnerable. And although they're able to work at the moment because the risk of transmission is relatively low, we can quickly identify those people should there be a spike and transmission go up again, and take appropriate steps to reduce their risk. We shared the risk assessment process with the bus operators and their occupational health providers. As far as I'm aware, that or a very similar risk assessment process has been undertaken by the bus operators, so they are aware of who their more vulnerable employees are. And that would be helpful if there is a second spike. I'm afraid I can't answer the question with regards to remote sign-on, and I don't know if there is anybody from TfL
It's all right.
who can.
Sam, I know, unfortunately Gareth isn't here, and John is will be able to come in and just say something on that. But just overall to reassure you, we will follow up with the bus operators on, we actually have a meeting later today with regard to this research, and I will use that as an opportunity to discuss with bus colleagues that they are tracking and following up with the bus operators on their progress on the their own individualized risk assessments. And just on the, I mean, Sam's absolutely right that there's a whole range of new measures in place to mitigate risk, but also we are tracking the risk at a London level and working obviously within the framework for which we've managed the whole of operations within London in terms of whether local lockdowns are going to be required or anything like that. At the moment, risk levels in London are quite low compared to other parts of the country. But there are absolutely plans in place if local action is needed, and we would take action on that. And it's obviously informed by the agencies that are tracking local infection levels. So, John, did you just want to say any? I know it's not your complete area of responsibility, but just anything on the remote sign-on?
Yes, I mean, it's been a subject of discussion. I'm not personally familiar with it. I have asked a question from one of Claire's team, and I think it's part of the dialogue with the trade unions at the moment, because obviously there's concern about control of people coming into the system who may be trying to, who have symptoms who won't be picked up if remote log on is continued. Remote log on still continues in the rail industry, interestingly, but it is something that's being taken up. So if I'm able to feed back after the meeting, if I get more during the meeting, I'll put my hand up and report, if that's okay.
Okay. Sorry, Kay, could I just come back and say, when do we think we will be able to know and announce that all those risk assessments, the uniform TfL model risk assessments, have been rolled out throughout all the bus operators?
So just to clarify, there isn't necessarily a model risk assessment process that we are imposing upon other bus operators. We have developed an approach based on information and the approach that both the NHS itself developed and Network Rail. What we need to assure is that the approaches taken by bus operators are comparable in their scope and ability to identify at-risk individuals. And we are working on that, and consistently, I'm fairly confident it is in order. We can pick that up with you offline. It's not something we will be announcing, but we can make sure that you're informed at a later date.
That's exactly what I meant. Not so much announcement, but to reassure.
Announcement to you. Yeah. Okay.
But before we leave the risk assessment, Lily, I was going to ask something similar in a broader context, and I'll come to that a bit later. But just specifically, I think the paper did talk about the risk assessment tool, which we've made available to bus operators. So I was going to ask, in the more general context of TfL's ability to influence bus operator practices, how we can do more than simply recommend the tool. What levers are there open to us to ensure that there's consistent use of that tool or another risk assessment tool that's equally robust across all the operators? So it's a more general point about our relationship with the operators.
Yeah,
You've got
well,
the
I think
you've got the meeting this afternoon, which is one mechanism, I'm assuming. But is there anything more that you can tell us?
Well, so the meeting this afternoon is an internal meeting, but absolutely, if Claire was here, she would tell you, and I think John will come in and support this, about the very close working relationship with the bus operator companies, which has involved daily calls on this, and their absolute commitment to understand the risks that their workforce faces. Sam, you might just give a little flavour of the actual briefings. This isn't that we've just sort of emailed them the tool. Sam, you've given face-to-face briefings and dialogue on this, both to the operators and to their occupational health providers.
Yes, I mean, we spent... can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We hijacked about an hour of one of Claire's meetings to talk to the operators in great detail about what we were doing. And their occupational health providers then requested a meeting. So we spent about an hour or two with them presenting the tool and what we're doing. And then a further hour with some of them who requested a follow-up with regards to some questions they had from that. So we've put in quite a lot of time with them, and I believe that most of them are using something very similar, if not the same, as what we're using.
If I can add to that, yes, I've had confirmation that all the operators are using one risk assessment tool or another. So the example of where it isn't our own is with Arriva Group, for example, who have a tool for their rail and bus operations. And in our approach to these contractors, we often will assess what they have themselves, and if that works for us, then we are quite happy for them to use their own tool. But we haven't found, either on this or any number of other things through the COVID period, that there's a lot of resistance to using tools that we have where ideas are brought forward by ourselves. We found very much a collaborative approach to that, both on our rail and bus contracts. To be honest, they've seen us as having a lot of the initial ideas and wanting to pursue them. It's a competitive market out there after all, and if they don't, they have some incentive to be as good as they can be, because if not, we could put it in to our future bus contracts where we make it a requirement, and then they'll have to, otherwise they can't bid for work. So I think the incentives are there, but the collaboration is working well at the minute.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Mei Ling and then Nina.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just 2 points. The first one is to follow up on what you've also said, that how do we know as a panel that not just the recommendation on risk assessment, but all the recommendations in stage 1, how do we know that they are going to be implemented? So it's by getting assurance for this panel, and what sort of support, incentives, and, well, hopefully not penalties we have. We need to support the operators if they're the lead implementer of these recommendations. What can we do more to actually help them? It is good to know that there's a high level of collaboration and will and leadership shown from the operators. So I think that's a much more general point, that I think this panel need future assurances that all these recommendations where the operators and ourselves are the lead implementer are being carried out in a timely fashion as well. My second point is about access to test and trace facilities. And obviously we know transport workers, not just the bus drivers, but even our own staff are key workers, and they should get priority. But having heard and read on the difficulties of the test and trace system in terms of access and also getting results, and people have to drive long distances to get that. What can we do, to help, if you like, the bus operators and the bus drivers to make sure that they really have quick access, and the families have quick access to the test and trace system, because it sounds tremendously shambolic and almost at breaking point in some parts of the country.
Thanks, Mei-Ling. Why don't I just touch on the first point, and then Sam can perhaps talk about the test and trace options that we're looking at. I mean, I think there's a number of mechanisms by which we're tracking the actions being delivered. One is through these regular operator calls. The other is through the steering group that I chair for the research, and that has the relevant representatives from TfL bus operations on it. But we'd be happy to bring a short update to the November panel, just saying where we've got to with implementing the actual recommendations, just to close off, because it's obviously come up through a number of comments. So I think as an action, we'll take that away just to update, because obviously this paper sort of set the scene and said what the findings is, hasn't said what we're doing in response. It's such an important issue. We're happy to bring a short paper updating on that to the next meeting. But Sam, did you just want to say a little bit about the thinking? I mean, obviously we are drawing on the government's test and trace system, and to date that has worked, but just some of the other thinking you're thinking around testing. And obviously we did the asymptomatic trial with bus drivers as well.
Certainly. So we're monitoring the whole testing situation very closely. And at the moment, in order for in-cab training to take place, train operators are now having testing which we're arranging privately for them once a week while they're doing in-cab training for reassurance. But these tests, because they take 24 to 48 hours to come back, are not ideal. Ideally, we need a test that will give you quick results. And there are tests like this coming on board. At the moment, the only test that is available commercially that we're aware of that can give a test result in 30 minutes still requires a laboratory setup behind it. So it would need a sort of mobile van with a lab in it, and isn't actually feasible to use at present. But I think that very soon there will be quick saliva tests that give instant results and which don't require any laboratory setup. And we're constantly horizon scanning for those, and then have a plan of how they could be deployed and used if they become available.
Thank you very much. Nina.
I've got two main questions. One, I'll start with the test and trace element. The question I had was, for how many times have our bus operators been contacted from the test and trace government process when individuals have tested positive and they've used our buses? And how does that work? You know, so the consumer users of the buses, just sharing it. When I get on the bus, which I have been doing to come to my office here in London, there's some great stickers all over that bus. You know, go in here, no more than 30. The bus drivers more often, you know, sat behind the screen, got the face mask on sometimes, not all times. But there's no assurance in there about touching the surfaces in the bus other than knowing that it's been cleaned. So I don't know when was it last cleaned or anything like that. So that raises the anxiety level. But if there's been customers who have proven to be infected, how do we follow through to let the bus operators know that they've had somebody who's been infected on that bus? I know it's phenomenally difficult, but is that a question that's been asked as part of this study? How can we, you know, understand the status of what's happening on our buses? We've got Oyster cards, we've got everything, because you have to tap in. So somehow with data, there should be something that we can do that's clever. So that's number one. And then the other aspect is, how aligned are we based on the study? Because I was reading the sections around the status of the health of our bus drivers. How aligned are we with the recommendations of what the government's been coming out about? Notwithstanding any ethnicity or anything like that, but obesity and the desire that there's offerings of support to drop 2 kilos, and all of a sudden that reduces your risk of contracting COVID-19. And I'm talking about everybody, and I'm thinking about myself too, because I can feel my weight creeping up. But it's this joining up of efforts which simplifies and clarifies to our staff, whether they're our staff and operators operating within our framework, that we can help make it joined up, that we don't have to do everything as TfL. And the last bit, I've just looked at the risk assessment online for TfL, and Gareth is due to review the risk assessment on the 15th of September for surface transport. So it's pretty generic in there. It really is. Everything tends to refer back to that. It needs to be made alive. And I would want to be able to find, just like this, what the risk assessments for every single one of our operators. No ifs, no buts. We have to be able to see every single one of them, and we should be able to point to them from our website for them. And if we can, it's not an exercise I've done, that's fantastic. But if we can't, the government has said for employees with over 50 people, they need to have published, up-to-date, working safely risk assessments online. And everybody should be able to find it easily. Thank you.
Thanks.
Before, would it, to save us keeping on going backwards and forwards, Lily, when you and Sam come back to wind this up, perhaps I'll ask my question now because it links to something that Nina said. Lily, you said that you're going to come back to us at the next meeting with an update, and I wonder in that item you could include a bit more about an aspect of the UCL report that is not touched on for understandable reasons in this immediate paper, because the paper is concentrating on immediate responses to the pandemic threat. There's a theme running through the UCL report about the multiple risk factors that affect drivers because of existing health conditions, some of which are exacerbated by the job itself, and the need for, in the words of the report, enhanced protection through early intervention on ill health problems. So you haven't touched on that, and it would be interesting to know what is intended as a response to that particular part of the set of recommendations. It goes to drivers' working conditions. It goes to what we've already talked about in terms of fatigue management, but it goes a bit wider than that. I think I'm inferring from the paper that our response to this is centred around the health bus, which was an initiative that predated the pandemic and the immediate emergency, which didn't prevent the immediate emergency. So I'm just interested to know how that particular initiative can be, I don't know, given more oomph or be made more effective. I mean, it does pertain to the second part of the research, but it's got more general, wider applicability outside the immediate emergency about the health of bus drivers, which is not helped by the very fact that they're sitting down all day and not necessarily experiencing the best kind of health enhancing facilities in the rest of their working environment, even outside the bus. So,
okay, well, yeah, why don't we wrap up those answers? I'm going to pick up some of the points that Nina started with on how how often confidence in how often the bus is cleaned and whether that links into the track and trace, but maybe and also the availability risk assessments. But maybe Sam, you could pick up these broader points about the occupational health and what we hope to learn from the research and how that links in, as Nina suggested, to the other learnings that we've had from the DFT and stuff. Just Nina, reflecting your experience, and just to reassure you, although some of those bus drivers might not have had masks on, they don't need to wear masks. They're not required
breaking up. I can't hear you.
Their
Sorry.
role, because they're working and they're in a position that they're not doing what they should be. Sorry, you can't hear me.
It all went into very broken up. Sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying, Lily. I think.
Oh, that's sorry.
Could you say that
Apologies.
again?
Is this any clear? Sorry, Nina. Is this any clearer?
I can hear you now. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'll turn my video off. I was just starting by, I know that you were concerned that perhaps some drivers weren't wearing masks. Just to reassure you, they're not required to wear masks when driving the bus.
I know that, but as other people may not be as aware of that fact, and it looks a bit startling.
Yeah, you know? I understand that. So just to clarify, in terms of the reassurance, the buses are cleaned every day, and they're cleaned with germicidal products every day, and that has a lasting impact. So in terms of touching and contact with the bus, customers can and should feel confident about using the bus. You ask a very important question, which is whether and how often the presence on a bus of someone who is subsequently tested positive for coronavirus is then highlighted. In my understanding, and I need to follow this up with Claire, that isn't something that has come through in terms of being reported as a close contact by individuals using the track and trace system. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's never happened, that someone has used a bus when they're potentially positive or asymptomatic positive, but it is obviously true that people would find it very difficult to identify the people that they were with on the bus. So that it might be for that reason that it's not being surfaced by the track and trace system. But I will follow up with Claire on that. More anecdotally, we did look internationally at whether public transport services were being identified as transmission hotspots, and there wasn't evidence that they were in terms of being reported in other contact trace systems as being the sources of hotspots of infection. So that was reassuring, but it doesn't totally bottom out that question. It's something we need to continue to look at. Just on the risk assessments, and I'm glad you managed to find one on our website. That is the highest level risk assessment. There are quite detailed risk assessments that sit underneath those. And obviously for the bus operators themselves, their risk assessment should be on their websites. Now, you raised the question as to whether we should have the links through from our website to their website. And I think that's a really good question. And I'll take that away and see whether we could potentially action that, because that would give good transparency on that. I think, Sam, why don't you pick up some of those points just to, about the occupational health and what we hope to learn and implement.
Yeah, I think those points with regards to sort of perhaps generally poor health amongst certain working groups, it's a very good point, and it's well known and quite difficult to tackle. I know that they're looking at the health bus, because I think that because of COVID that hadn't been in use, but looking at how to re-energise that programme. I know that one of their external occupational health providers provides the health promotion on that, but we'd be happy to support the bus companies from our occupational health department as well, and to join that into anything that we're doing at TfL. I think that, what we really need to look at is right from the start of people's careers. I think once they've been in the job for a long time, some of those sort of poor habits and the sort of problems with shift work make it harder for people to change. But I think if we can start with education right from when they start in their job roles and throughout, and provide regular support and health promotion, that may be beneficial. And we're certainly looking at increasing health promotion for our employees within TfL, as well as the bus companies.
I think the point I was making is is aligning with all the other government initiatives. I totally get everything that you said. Those are treating, preempting ill health. But at the moment, there's people are seeing all of these different things coming at them, and they want to know what is the best thing to do as an employee as well as a human being living in COVID-19 times. And if we can help, direct a view or a path or a shower, it's taking that uncertainty, and that's what we're going to be covering in the wellbeing survey, aren't we? It's all of this unknown. So how do we help people to make those right decisions at the time of uncertainty as well? So this dropped 2 kilos. My brother-in-law's on it, and he's now moved from being diabetic to not being diabetic.
Okay, well done him. I can see Bronwyn, but my point was more a general point about TfL's relationship with the bus operators, and within that, our ability to influence issues that come under the heading of general working conditions for this particular group of workers. And I'm not just plucking this out of the air, because it's specifically referenced in the UCL report, where it does talk about the need for, quote, enhanced protection through early intervention on ill health problems. So my question specifically was about how we as TfL can influence in a practical and specific and monitorable way the practices of bus operators, which are aimed at early ill health intervention, not just in a responsive way, but in a preventive way. Some of that does go to working conditions, because as we have already acknowledged in the work we've already done in fatigue management, which has led to changes in contract requirements already, and other aspects of drivers' working conditions that we have already talked about, such as rest facilities and the quality of rest facilities. So what I was specifically asking, if you to come back with, is more information about how we propose to respond to that aspect of this Part 1 report.
Okay, well, we will address that in the November paper, Kay, but also to say that's very much the subject of the second phase of the research, which is actually, so it was identified at a high level in the first phase, but the questionnaires and the detailed studies in investigation through to the bus drivers themselves that's happening now is to throw more light on the importance of different aspects of bus workers' conditions and their whole lifestyle, and all of the and the elements where the bus companies will have a role, the elements where we'll have a role, and the elements where the individuals will have a role. So I think by the time we finish the research, which will be near Christmas, that's when we'll actually have the best view on answering your question.
Okay, thank you. Bronwyn.
Yes, I was about to make the point, which I think you've made prior to me, Kay, but just to re-emphasise that point around the Loughborough research and the recommendation for proper facilities for bus drivers, which is doubly reinforced by the findings around the UCL research, and also to add that fatigue is a factor in reducing the immune response. It's well researched and well known that fatigue interferes with your body's capacity to fight off viruses and bacteria.
Your hand's still up, Nina. Did you want to come back? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And thanks, Sam and Lily. You'll come back to us with more detail in the next meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks. Great comments.
Okay, so now we're moving on to the wellbeing tracker, item 9. Is that you again, Sam?
Yes, it is. It's Sam.
Or is that
Can I also welcome Samantha Sutton, though, who's also on this call? Just before Sam Phillips comes in, Samantha Sutton works in Trisha's team and has been the absolute star in terms of leading, shaping and designing this questionnaire. So it's really well placed to answer some of the questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, hello, Sam.
Hi.
Okay, over to whichever Sam is going to introduce this.
Hi, I think that's me. This wellbeing tracker took place over a 4-week period ending on July the 10th in order to provide a view of employee wellbeing given the ongoing demands as a result of the COVID pandemic. So it's important to note that employees could complete the survey more than once, and it used a mixture of attitudinal and open comment questions. The tracker is going to reopen again in October alongside the Viewpoint survey, which will allow us to compare findings from July to those in October. So the main findings, 44% of employees reported their well-being as being good or very good. And then there was a 30-odd% who said they were okay. 51% of employees reported that they felt TfL's support of their well-being was good or very good. The main things that were worrying people were their job future. They worried a lot about the people who were close to them, and they worried about their physical well-being and managers any likely changes. And the managers need to continue to focus on well-being and how to communicate and support with people who are harder to reach, such as frontline operational colleagues and those who are on furlough. Connection, it was identified that it was important that leaders and managers stay connected and improve connectivity in teams with virtual meetings and more input from managers to their teams. And also equipment. So the main highlights with regards to equipment was ensuring that frontline employees had adequate PPE, and that people working from home were given adequate equipment, DSE equipment. And so there were recommendations, therefore, for managers to look at the general advice, but the specific advice for their areas. And already we've had inquiries to the wellbeing team from different parts of the business to say, could we go and assist with their particular concerns and initiatives? Managers are being encouraged to review workload and make sure that employees are taking annual leave and in order to rest and recuperate. And senior managers are taking leave, you know, and not contacting their teams when they're on leave. So that's setting an example. Lots of guidance has been issued on staying in touch with people who have been on furlough, and a number of health and wellbeing initiatives started specifically for people on furlough, such as our Wellbeing Wednesdays. We've asked managers to commit to knowing about, promoting and engaging with all the multitude of wellbeing initiatives on offer, and to make the mind mental health training mandatory for their teams. And there's now an IT initiative taking place to ensure that people working from home are easily able to access home equipment. And there continue to be numbers of weekly communications, and managers are being encouraged to ensure that they are cascaded to their teams. All of this is more detailed in the slide presentation, which Sam Sutton kindly put together for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, the other Sam, is there anything you wanted to add?
Just to say that the survey It's run by the same people that run our Viewpoint survey, but the difference between the two surveys were that this was a much higher level because it was a quick survey. We wanted to get it out and then have that tracker ability where the results were shared on a week-by-week basis. That will differ slightly when Viewpoint comes out in end of September, because they'll only be able to fill in the survey once, unlike multiple times in the June-July survey.
Thank you. Any points from members? I just wanted to say that this was a really worthwhile initiative. I don't know whether you were disappointed with the level of response. Obviously, the responses are content rich and there's a lot to learn. It was about a third, wasn't it, of the workforce, which seemed to be a bit disappointing. I don't know whether
to our team.
Kay, would you like me to respond?
Please do, Andy.
So Brian, it's a great question. I think the first thing to say is if you look at the stats for the Tube, actually the response rate for the Tube is pretty low. It was only 17%. So actually a lot of our frontline colleagues, because this was an online only survey, I think didn't respond. And that's something we've got to focus on significantly for a Viewpoint. We are doing an awful lot along the recommendations that Sam has already talked along in terms of communicating with our teams, frontline management visibility, going out and about as much as we can. And I have to say, actually, the feedback, particularly from my own visits to stations and elsewhere, has been remarkably positive. People feel incredibly supportive and supported during this unprecedented time. So we're not complacent. We're actually doing a lot of work as well to see how we can further improve staff welfare facilities and that sort of thing, despite the financial challenges we've got. And it's all about communication and making sure that people are kept up to date as much as possible with what's going on, particularly as they are all concerned around, they know the state of the financial situation we find ourselves in, and they see what's going on with friends and family and colleagues elsewhere in other sectors. So that's a key element for us around making sure we keep people informed of what's going on and continued engagement with the trade unions. But actually the morale and motivation out on the network, certainly from a Tube perspective, is really positive. And actually people are, they're glad to see people coming back, albeit in relatively low numbers, into the stations and onto the trains. But we're not complacent and we'll keep focusing on that.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That's encouraging to hear. Over to you, Sam, for the other questions.
Yeah, so I can, on the response rate, so Engine, the company that ran the survey, although it is, as we think, a low response rate, did say that was actually a good one, because we have to think at the time what was going on. It's a new survey. It doesn't have the momentum that Viewpoint has behind it. And because it was done at a high level, it was done at MD level, and then within London Underground at a functional level, it still gives that representative sample because you're not going down to team level. And then to the point about people filling in the survey the second time round, yes, we're incorporating it within Viewpoint, so they've only got to fill in one more survey. And we had feedback last year that the survey was much easier to fill in, that is Viewpoint. So it's just being kind of stuck onto that, so it feels like one survey. And because it's part of Viewpoint, because we go down further with the demographic detail, we'll be able to get some much more rich data from the results. And with the point around moving paperless, we've got a whole campaign to try and support our colleagues, especially those within assets and line ops that are used to filling it in on paper, to help them fill it in online.
Thank you. Nina?
Thank you. I guess I'm looking at page 50 of the pack, which is biggest negative impact on well-being, and the patterns that we're seeing there, and the concerns about my job is across the board, literally on every single one. It only dips down twice, and so the communications around that. It'd be interesting to, if there's any specific areas around it. So whilst they say, yes, my well-being's okay, but there's no hiding from that. The concerns about the job is pretty high up there, particularly when you're hearing in the media about all the different layoffs from different organisations and hearing the furlough schemes coming to the end and so on and so forth. I just wanted to understand, you know, what specific bits around those top 3 priority areas that people are what you're doing about it. So concerns about people close to me, there's not much you can do about that, but concerns about my job.
Is that something that you would pick up, Tricia?
Yeah, we're certainly picking it up, certainly in terms of our comms and engagement, and also looking to the future in terms of what the employee value proposition is going forward, so that we can engage people around the narrative for the next period of time. And certainly, I know Andy and I have spoken about this, and Jane and Sam and the team have been working out what that would look like. But I think, you know, we also need to be honest that we are, you know, we've got huge financial challenges, so it's not a surprise that people are concerned about that in particular. But it's what can we talk to our people about in terms of being honest and transparent, but also about what's the proposition going forward as an organisation, and being positive about that.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously the pressure from workload is there as well. So and who is it, you know, that is reporting that in particular?
And all the MDs are looking at workload specifically in their own areas, and also about prioritisation, about what's important and what we take forward. Yeah. I think Andy was going to pop in at that point as well about the narrative.
Yeah, so I was just going to say 2 things. I mean, one is, you know, we've been very open with everybody around the state of the financial situation we find ourselves in. Bear in mind that the survey was done, you know, a few weeks ago, when we were right in the heart of, you know, probably just on the back of the initial funding agreement with government. In fact, the first week of the survey might even have been before we got the funding agreement. I can't recall. And we've been very open with everybody around, you know, where we are in terms of the next stage. They know we only have funding to a point in time. So, you know, they can see what's going on elsewhere. They're very concerned that if we don't get the right funding agreement, and even if we do, we've got to, you know, continue to focus on efficiency, what that means for them. So we give regular updates on where we are with discussions with government and the KPMG review, etc. The pressure on workload, I think that's probably much more focused on the non-operational areas, as you would imagine. Apart from those who've been, you know, as many of us did during the height of the pandemic, we were working 7 days a week, literally, because of the nature of the crisis. So there has been a natural sort of pressure relief on that. And, you know, Sam and Lily's point earlier around making sure people take annual leave, and making sure those of us at the top from Exco down are demonstrating the right behaviours when we're on leave is really important. So we've all been doing that very, very well, I think, so far, and it's sent some very clear messages across the organisation that actually if the MDs are taking their time off and not on email and not answering their phone unless it's an absolute crisis, then actually I can do the same when I'm on leave, and that sends a really positive message, perhaps one that hasn't necessarily been adhered to in the past. So for me, that's quite a significant change in culture in the organisation, which is one that Andy is very supportive, and the rest of the Exco are as well.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll find out a lot more after the Viewpoint survey. Can we move on now to the Human Resources Quarterly Report, Tricia?
So we've actually covered quite a bit of what is in the report, and I guess the key thing as a segue from the last discussion is to talk about Viewpoint, and Sam will come in to talk about a little bit more. But we are going to be launching the survey on the 28th of September, and there's a huge campaign supporting our managers and employees, particularly around the operational areas, to complete the survey online, which is the first year that we'll have operational employees filling in the survey online, which I know may be of concern in terms of response rates, but we're putting everything in place to ensure that we can keep those response rates up, and particularly working in Andy and Gareth's area with the operational areas to ensure that everything's in place to make it as easy as possible for employees to complete the survey online. We're also working with different stakeholders, including our trade unions and staff network groups, to lead the launch. And we are sourcing iPads for colleagues in line operation and asset locations. and they're about to complete it, the survey on a work or personal PC or a mobile device. So we're doing everything we possibly can to maximise the opportunity to get a response rate that we're looking for. But clearly this is a change. It's probably worth noting that most organisations that provide employee engagement surveys like Engine, a lot of organisations now don't do paper surveys anyway. So we are trying to move forward in terms of making sure that we maximise on having the best provider to help us. We're also creating a how-to film, and Sam might want to comment on that, with an ops colleague showing how to complete the survey and organising local demonstration sessions. So again, a lot of work is going into the preparation. Sam has worked tirelessly to make sure that we get the best possible outcome going forward. I guess, given we've talked about quite a bit that was in my report, the only other thing I probably want to mention is furloughing. We talked about furloughing at the TfL board, and the numbers that were furloughed at its height was nearly 7,500 people. As of the end of August, I know this is, outside of this report, but we're now down to 1,812. So those numbers are reduced. And Mark, I'm aware that at the last board meeting, I think you asked about how we were, communicating with people on furlough, but also how we're bringing them back into the organisation. And you'll see in the quarterly report that we have done quite a lot of guidance and sort of reboarding guidance for managers about bringing people back off furlough to try and make sure they feel included and back in the workplace and up to speed, having been on furlough for a period of time, whether that's an extended period of time or that we have had flexible furlough as well. So I just wanted to highlight that in there, and obviously we're managing that and obviously considering what the opportunities are in the next phase when the scheme comes to an end at the end of October. The other one, during the whole COVID process, and we also mentioned this earlier, is that we have done a lot on our trade union engagement. Certainly Andy, Gareth, myself and colleagues and Lily, we had, it was weekly meetings with the trade unions, and we are continuing that ongoing dialogue outside of the normal consultation negotiation processes to make sure that we're engaging constructively with our trade unions, and in the same way we do at company council with enhanced meetings and more frequency. In terms of the people strategy, just to signal that we will be bringing that back to you in November. Clearly, the whole world has moved on, and we've learned some lessons as we've gone through this COVID period and on an ongoing basis, that we want to bring a further update on that and how that's shaping up, so that we can be much more forward looking. And also, the hashtag that we used during the whole COVID period was about doing the right thing. So that's something that we want to continue to do. And also, obviously, we talked about one of the things was accommodation previously, and I know there's a separate agenda item on that. But we're also learning the lessons from remote working and flexibility, so that we can look at how that plays out going forward, whilst there may be accommodation, looking at what the new flexible workforce will look like going forward in the medium to long term. So I guess I'll take any questions at that point, but Sam, maybe you might want to just pick up anything else that I've missed on Viewpoint, given you're right in the thick of it and leading the way.
Yeah, there's just a couple of points I wouldn't mind saying. So we're really keen to move the survey online. So that's one of the key areas of our comms focus this time, but obviously aware that we've got colleagues in operational roles that used to fill it in on paper. However, there's not as many as you might think that filled in paper. So last year we had just over 4,000 colleagues that filled in a paper survey. In previous years, we've moved over most of Certis operational staff. It's just Dial-A-Ride that was still filling in paper last year, and they're fine, and we've got support in place to help them move over to online this time. So now we're going to have a generic link, so people that don't access their work email, which we know a lot in operational roles don't, they'll have a generic link, or they can access a QR code, which is going to be kind of on Yammer, it's going to be on posters, pay slips, everywhere. And like many of us have seen in restaurants, you get your phone and it asks you just to hover the camera over the QR code. So it's as simple as that, and we're getting a colleague within line ops and assets just to demonstrate that to their colleagues. And a kind of simple, if you can see, step-by-step guide, 1, 2, 3 on what you need to do. So, and then the other key thing is around confidentiality, because we often get questions about that, and we just want to keep reiterating the points that that's why we employ someone like Engine to run the survey, and to show that, you know, you say something, it goes straight back to Engine. We don't see individual responses. So, you know, be as open and honest as you want. So that's the key points I just wanted to raise.
Okay, thanks both. I could see Nina and Bronwyn.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that really good report, and it pulls together everything we have been discussing earlier. Question I've got is around the graduates and apprentices that were due to be starting. So this is on page 8 of your report. September, these will be starting January and April. Does that mean we won't start paying them until January and April as well? So the question I've got specifically is about the Kickstart scheme that the government are really keen to promote. That came out last week about recruitment of young people up to 23 or who are likely to be unemployed, which they are still until you recruit them to join, even though you've deferred. And there's 25 hours worth minimum salary support available. I think you must be aware of it, Tricia. And the minimum requirement for you to be able to be eligible for that, for support from them, is you recruit 30, and that you can take them all on board. And as TfL, with your fantastic HR team, perfectly able to be able to coordinate something like that, and maybe work with some of your suppliers who might be able to take on board and participate in the Kickstart scheme. And we're seeing that the prevalence around that is trying to make them green jobs type of aspects. We're still getting to grip as a trade association to understand what that all means, because it's been eking out. But there is some money there. That's all I'm saying. But it might be more complicated and heavy administrative to make it happen. But you are deferring people starting for 6 months who are then going to be unemployed.
Yeah, so Nina, we've considered it, and we need to look at it a bit more. I guess our key priority is making sure that those that we're planning to start in September can start next year, and that we want to make sure they get the best start. So investing in that and the engagement with them in the meantime. But also we have a number of apprentices and graduates who'll be rolling off this September and now. So we've got to make sure that what we do is maximise their role. So that's really been the priority. But it is something that we can explore further as we go through the next couple of months. But I need to check with the team about the admission. Some of them were on furlough over the summer, so it's not been the priority. The priority is about those that are due to come on board, but also those who are due to roll off, to make sure that we secure roles them, having invested in them over their apprenticeship or a grad scheme. But I can take it away and have another.
I think that this Kickstart scheme is to really help for the young and people who've been unemployed or are likely to be made unemployed, and this money. That's my point. It may be too administrative overburdening, but I think it's worth looking at, particularly if you are talking about those two specific areas.
Yeah, no, that's something. I will take that away, Nina, and I can maybe touch base with you again further on that and the panel. Thanks.
Bronwyn, then Mei Ling.
My question is around the apprentices as well. And, you know, the apprenticeship scheme is something that quite rightly TfL is very proud of. And we really want those apprentices to have nothing but a positive experience while they're with us. So my question is why we don't engage with them through the process of collective bargaining. My understanding is that they're not part of a collective bargaining unit, so we can't discuss with them, you know, all the issues, the problems that they might have, and resolve them collectively with them. So that's my question: why we don't ensure that we have that proper, mutual respecting relationship with them.
Well, I believe we do have a mutual respectful relationship with our apprentices, and we do a lot in terms of our engagement. Bronwyn, I am aware that you have sent me an email to that effect. So I will send you a response to your email by the end of the week.
Okay, hope it's very positive.
Okay. Mei-Ling.
Thank you, Chair. As far as the next survey goes, I think my point is, in terms of trying to increase the response rate, in particularly from our BAME staff and our more vulnerable employees, I think I'm saying this in the context of Black Lives Matter and also, you know, in the COVID world. I think we need to think of ways where we can encourage a higher response rate from some of our employees, like say in the context of BLM and COVID. So I welcome that, you know, make sure that we need to do that. I've got a couple of just HR related issues. I can't remember whether it was in this actual report or a previous report that it said somewhere that we've had over 5,000 employees who've actually been affected by COVID. I don't know what that actually means, whether they've had symptoms of COVID, whether they've had COVID that require a medical intervention, whether by a GP or hospitalization. And I was wondering whether do we have any clearer data on the extent of our employees, our 27,000 employees, not just our contractors' employees, of the extent of people who've had COVID or members of their family who've had COVID and who's come through it as well, because I think that's really important in terms of the way we actually need to do the next tranche of, if you like, health promotion. I'm thinking of, in particular, with the coming winter months, how we need to promote people getting their flu jabs, for example, because we know that flu symptoms are very similar in the beginning to COVID symptoms as well. So I think we need to make sure that we know to what extent our employees have had direct COVID and come through it, and also how we actually need those data to help our next round of, if you like, health promotion, and also whether we can survey and encourage reporting of our employees if they had difficulties accessing the government-run track and trace and testing system, because actually to help us prepare for the next phase, the next wave, which I'm sure will come, we need to think of whether we need to enhance the government-led test and trace system to make sure that our employees and the families get quick access to an effective test and trace service. We know that there are over 1,000 strains of the virus now and hundreds of mutations now, and there's at least 3 strains that are prevalent in clusters of European countries. The strains in Africa and America are slightly different, but nevertheless, with increased travel, increased return of young people to schools and to universities, we need to be really aware how we can actually make sure that people's health are paramount and how they can protect themselves, you know, for an impending second wave.
So do you want to comment on that, and then Sam can come back on the points about the survey?
So I was going to let Sam do the points on the survey. I mean, Lily will maybe pick up on the flu jabs, but just to confirm, and Lily, hopefully I've got this right, but we are going to be offering flu jabs for all TfL employees going forward. The test and trace I'll leave to Lily. But in terms of the numbers, I'm not sure they were in my report or whether they were in Lily's, but it may have been a previous report, Mei-Ling. We'll have to try and find out what the latest is, because I think that will be a previous paper that probably just needs to be updated, and how we can break down that data as you suggest. So I'll have to take that one away if that's okay.
Okay, thanks. And Sam on the survey?
Just to confirm, Tricia, absolutely.
Sorry, go on, Lily.
She said absolutely, so she's agreeing with you.
Yeah, no, just to confirm, yes, all employees will be offered a flu jab. That program's rolling out imminently, and we'll take away the comments on track and trace. There is some data on illness due to COVID in the quarterly report that you received.
Okay, and then on the response rates, so we've engaged with the staff network groups because they helped review some of the demographic questions that were in the survey to make sure that we were using the correct terminology. So they will be supporting getting the messages out there. And part of the campaign is around make sure that you're part of the picture, don't let someone else speak for you. So we're making sure that we get our comms out into all channels. And then it's also around getting people to select the different demographics, because you'll see in the results of the wellbeing survey and then also previous viewpoints that some people prefer not to say. And then of course we don't get all the whether it be wellbeing or engagement data. So it's trying to encourage more people to select the different demographic groups.
Andy, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, sorry, Kay, just very quickly, I was just, Sam and Lily might correct me, but just in terms of Mayling's question around the 5,000, a large number of those were people who were in the vulnerable and very vulnerable category. So they received notification from the NHS with a letter that they needed to self-isolate or shield. And also bear in mind that when lockdown first occurred, it wasn't very definitive who should be in that category. So a lot of people went off because they had relatively mild forms of a health condition that the government was less specific about. So, yeah, the actual numbers who had COVID, I don't believe were anything like that number. But in terms of that they were impacted by COVID, that covers all of the staff and colleagues in those categories. So I think it's something just worth clarifying.
Yes.
Thank you, Mei-Ling. Thumbs up. Trish, I just want to ask one quick question, and that's about the numbers and proportions of staff who are already back from furlough and working. I know at least one directorate is almost fully staffed up now. I mean, I'm presuming they're working from home. And is there anything that we have learnt from that? Anything we need to know and apply as more people come back from furlough, or has that all been very straightforward?
So I think it depends on the area, but what we have been doing, as outlined in my pack, is to provide guidance to managers about how to bring people back from furlough, and also and a lot of the experience that came out of that will have come out with the follow-up discussions following the wellbeing survey, where the furlough scores were slightly lower typically, and what that meant. And obviously we've taken on board those recommendations that Sam outlined in the wellbeing survey, particularly around accommodation, the feelings of isolation and not being able to do any work. In fact, some people said, well, they had more work to do because people were on furlough, but actually the whole reason people were on furlough was because the work stopped, and they were rotating where there was a reduction in the work in a particular team. So we're just looking at how that manifested itself going forward, and just to make sure that that we learn from that in the event that this ever happens again, because furlough was something completely new to us in the first place. We've also done quite a lot on remote working guidance. So even though they come back furlough and they're still working remotely, about how managers can manage individuals who are working remotely as well, just to learn some of the lessons that we've learned over the last few months.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you, and we look forward to tracking the progress of the Viewpoint survey, and we'll get the results of that after the new year, I presume, as usual. Can we now move on to the item 11 on reoccupation of TfL offices? Is this Ben?
Hello, it's Adrian Reid here. So I'm the head of facilities operations, part of estates management, and I'm part of the New Ways of Working group responsible for the recovery and reoccupation of our offices. So a number of our colleagues have already returned to some of our office buildings, either because they can't do their job from home or due to issues around well-being or welfare. So we're now planning a phased reoccupation to our head office buildings from the end of this month, which will allow a larger number of office-based colleagues to return to their offices. And obviously our priority is on the safety and well-being of our people and our service partners. So we therefore need to maintain COVID-19 security in our buildings as more people start to occupy them. And there are a number of implications around capacity and how they will look and feel and operate as more people start to return. So the majority of our people are currently working from home, will continue to do so at least until the end of the year. So reoccupation will be an option for those wanting or needing to return, primarily for business or welfare reasons. So due to social distancing, the need to maintain COVID-19 security capacity will be significantly reduced. So whereas we had about 10,000 workspaces across our 3 buildings, that's now reduced to 4,000. And our offices will look and feel significantly different pre-COVID. So initially we'll open Palestra with some limited space within Pier Walk and Endeavour Square, and we've completed a risk assessment on the reoccupation, and we've shared that with our TU colleagues, and we shared further details with them yesterday at Company Council, which were largely well received. So what we're doing now, we're currently gathering demand, and the estates team are engaging with directors and senior managers to assess the potential level of demand for reoccupation. And we're asking managers to make a judgment based on engagement with their team about how many people will need to return to our offices. So based on current capacity restrictions, we're offering business units about 25% of existing workspace. So we've engaged about 50% of business units so far, and early indications are that that 25% capacity that we're offering will work overall, as some business units are requiring less than that, and others are stating that they may require more or may find that challenging. And it's also worth noting that people may not reoccupy the same office or area within an office as they did before. And engagement with all business units is expected to complete over the next 7 to 10 days. And insights from our wellbeing and home working surveys also tell us that the majority, so 69% of those currently working from home, wish to continue to do so 3 or more days a week. So we don't anticipate demand exceeding supply at this stage. And if demand to return to our offices does exceed supply, then we will prioritise reoccupation based on a clear business need, which will be informed for some work we've done around business impact analysis, but also continuing to meet the needs of colleagues experiencing wellbeing challenges. So we've developed detailed building operating protocols to ensure COVID security. So that's maintaining social distancing through one-way systems, protective screens in our receptions, our cafes, tailored signage, restricted numbers in lifts, travel in lifts to be upward only, apart from those who may need it for mobility or other reasons, and maintaining hygiene standards, so enhanced cleaning regimes, antiviral touchpoint cleaning, sanitising stations on floors. So we're currently clearing our workspaces to ensure that they're free of any non-essential equipment to assist with cleaning, and we're also leaving one empty desk between desks to ensure social distancing is maintained, and everybody will need to comply with track and trace, and we'll use the government track and trace system. And in the event of an outbreak, we already have a clear process for managing positive COVID cases in our offices, and that's been shared with our line managers. So working in a TfL office will feel very different for those who start to reoccupy. And once in the office, people will be encouraged not to exit and re-enter. They'll need to stay on their allocated floor and at their desk as much as possible, and then clear their desks at the end of each day. And for colleagues who want to return to the office to collaborate, safety must remain our main priority. So opportunities for collaboration will be limited, and we'll need to follow government guidance on meetings, which includes using remote tools as much as possible, and avoiding in-person meetings, and only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend. And we're shaping our guidance for people to help prepare them for the reoccupation. And we'll be asking managers to work with their teams to use the available space and workstations on a day-to-day basis. And we'll also need to continue to monitor the situation and get feedback. So we'll be gathering information from staff returning to make sure that we understand how that experience is going and what we might need to do to improve both our processes and how the buildings operate. And we plan to use a number of approaches to gather feedback, including surveys, focus groups, and surgeries to engage people. So the environment will be very different for our staff, but essential so that we can maintain COVID security to keep people safe. And we know we need to manage people's expectations on how many people can work in our offices on any given day and what it will be like when they do. And we'll be assessing the effectiveness and experience of reoccupation throughout. And we also have a detailed and comprehensive communications plan that sits alongside that. So I think that brings you up to date. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions that I can answer for you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Nina?
I thought that was a really great paper. Thank you very much. And your planned approach and awareness of what it will mean about coming back into an office to work is really well made. In our journey with our very small team, everybody was excited about coming back into the office, thinking that they'll be there collaborating with their team colleagues and everything, and they all said they wanted to come back into the office at least some of the time. There's the beginning of July, when we suddenly painted the picture very clearly of what it will look like and show that, you know, there's going to be hardly anybody here. Everybody's views then changed about how they wanted to work, because that journey of awareness is a big one, and you've got a lot of people to take through that. So your awareness of that is great. The question I have for you is, in your risk assessments, the use of face masks within your offices and in common and communal areas, you know, getting people to understand that when they're walking past people, wherever you're going to be allocating those desks, and depending on where your perspex screens are going to be going, and protecting the people sat at the desk from people walking around. What's your views on that? I'm asking as well because I'm curious to know what to do for my team as well.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and one we've really pained over. So our approach has been to maintain 2 metre social distancing throughout. So not to use face masks in offices, but we are aware that people will be travelling to work using face masks. So we have bins at the main reception alongside our sanitising stations. But it is something that we've thought long and hard about. It's also we've had some engagement with our TUs on this, and our agreed approach is that we'll maintain 2 metre social distancing throughout, reducing the need for a face mask on site.
Okay. My question also is getting people, when they're a bit more relaxed, to follow a one-way system.
Yes.
That is not a natural inclination of staff at all.
Yeah, and I'm actually in the office today just assessing our progress. And we have some very, very large floor stickers which are showing the movement of travel throughout. And actually people are being surprisingly obedient, although we haven't imposed that in full yet due to the numbers of people in the office, but that will be a challenge. But I'm confident our signage system is very clear and very robust.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any other comments. I just had one comment really, and I just want to congratulate you on all this planning, which gives us all a lot of confidence. And it was very welcome to see that the emphasis is on the starting point being individuals' preferences. And another dimension to this will be, in due course, even when TfL board meetings and committee meetings and panel meetings start taking place in buildings in a hybrid form or whatever, there will be issues for staff as well. and I know that other board members like myself will be very anxious that no member of staff in those circumstances is going to feel pressurised in any way to travel into buildings when that is not what they want to do.
Yeah, agreed. That's absolutely our approach. Is at the moment it is that choice. We're not forcing people back to work. So the office is available should people need it for business critical or welfare reasons.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And we can now move on to the next item, which is any other business. I haven't been aware of any items of urgent business. Nina, you've put your hand up.
I think, are we going to be discussing future items to consider for agenda, Chair? Is that in the discussions? Because I've got an item I'd like us to consider.
I think, sorry, I mean, it wasn't on the agenda as such because life is so peculiar at the moment, but do mention what that item would be.
I would like the members of the executive of the TfL to bring to the panel how they're going to be considering the buildings and also any of our business streams that are linked with housing or the building of housing or retrofitting of housing on our estate, on taking advantage of the green economic recovery schemes that the government are putting out there at the moment. I've not seen anything from Lily or from Graham or anything like that because it is a fast-moving area and a fast-spending area. The government have released something like 2 billion to be spent by the end of end of next March on retrofitting houses. So if we've got any homes or houses that we rent out that could take part in that, then there's opportunities to see upgrading of insulation and introduction of certain renewable energy technologies in those schemes. I'm sure Julian's aware that those things are happening in local authority level areas, but I'm just wondering, is there anything that the TfL's portfolio needs to be addressing that or could take advantage of that? Thank you.
Okay, Mailing, you're waving, and this is supposed to be not a discussion, but any urgent business. And Howard is now on the screen and is going to tell us off because we may not be saying anything that's urgent. But is your AOP
item for the future?
Sorry, is it another item for the future? Okay.
Yeah. I think in the context again of Black Lives Matters, I think it'd be useful to consider a strategic report on how our current EDI strategy could be further enhanced and built upon in that context as an employer.
Okay, thank you. Howard, did you want to say something about this?
Just going to say, both great questions. We'll take them both away as actions to either give you some information in the meantime or bring them to the next meeting. Possibly on Nina's point, we might try and get you some information earlier than the next meeting. The second point is a wider point that would need some discussion. So we'll happily put that on the agenda for the next meeting. We're very happy to do that.
And for future meetings, we'll go back to the routine of having a form indicating the future items, the schedule of future items throughout the year. We'll restore that. Presumably.
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you all very much. The date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 4th of November at 10 a.m. That is the close of the meeting at 13:19. Thank you all for your contributions and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Well done, Kay.